The elves have been around since before the sun and moon filled the skies of Arda. When the elves first awoke, the world was lit by the 2 trees of Valinor, but not all the elves would make it to see those trees upon awakening. Some would venture into the west, while others would remain behind in the east, which would leave us with a number of clans within the race of elves within Middle-earth. And beyond it all, it began on the shores of Cuivierne before the First Age, beneath a star-filled sky in a world lit by the 2 trees.
Build me an army worthy of Mordor.
Hello and welcome to The Broken Sword. In today's video we're going to look at their awakening and then the sundering of the elves from the beginning up until the diversification of their peoples into the main groups that we get by the start of The Lord of the Rings, which will be taking us back thousands of years beyond the First Age and into the years of the trees. There's a section in The Hobbit that gives us a glimpse at the varied and ancient race of elves, and numerous offshoots of an original people who awoke at Cuivierne from The Hobbit itself. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. These are not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is distrust of strangers. Though their magic was strong, even in those days they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the west, and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribes that never went to ferry in the west. There the light elves, and the deep elves, and the sea elves went and lived for ages, and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvellous things, before some came back into the wide world. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars, and they wandered in the great forests that grew tall in lands that are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of the woods, from which they could escape at times to hunt, or to ride and run over the open lands by moonlight or starlight. And after the coming of men they took ever more and more to the gloaming and the dusk. Still elves they were and remain, and that is, good people. We get a similar introduction which speaks to the most fundamental division among the elves in The Lord of the Rings Appendix F of the Elves, where we read, "The elves far back in the elder days became divided into 2 main branches, the West Elves, the Eldar, and the East Elves. Of the latter kind were most of the elven folk of Mirkwood and Lorien, but their languages do not appear in this history, in which all the elvish names and words are of Eldarin form. All of these elves, and more groups besides, spring from a single group. All elves trace their roots to Cuivierne. Although there are many subdivisions among the elves, they're based on history and geography rather than biology. The High Elves of the West, mentioned in the reference above, refers to the Calaquendi, the elves who journey to a man in the years of the trees, and the 3 groups named correspond to the 3 tribes of the Calaquendi. There were initially 3 groups of elves. The Minyar, being the first clan of the elves, all of whom went to Valinor with Ingwe and would become the Vanyar. The Tatyar, being the second clan of the elves, had half of whom go to Valinor with Finwë, with those going on to become the Noldor, and the other half stayed with either Morwë or Nerwë, who were the leaders amongst the Avari who did not answer the summons of Arome. Then we have the Nelyar, being the third clan of the elves, some of whom went to Tol Eressëa in Valinor, initially led by Alwë, later known as Thingol. Thingol himself in fact stayed behind in Middle-earth after meeting Melian the Maya and formed Doriath, and many of his group did stay with him. Olwë, Thingol's younger brother, led the rest to Tol Eressëa, and they became the Falamari, or in other terms, the Teleri. Those Nelyar that started would later be known as the Nelyarin Avari. Beyond this, the first distinction that occurs is between those that initially followed Arome to Valinor, the Eldar, and those that stayed behind at Cuivierne, the Avari. Note though that some Avari did eventually expand westward into Beleriand after a while. Along the way, some of the Eldar stopped following Arome and became labelled as the Umanyar. They were split up between what would become the Sindar, or the Grey Elves, which included the Falathrim, the Sea Elves and descendants of those who began as the Vanyar, and the Eglath, being those who abandoned the Great March and followed Thingol. The Nandor, or Wood Elves, include the Lyquendi, or Green Elves, as well as the Sylvan Elves. The Avari and the Umanya together are referred to as Moriquendi, also known as Elves of Darkness. Of the Eldar that followed Arome all the way to Valinor, they were split into the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Falmari, a group of the Teleri. I hope you are able to keep up with all of this. All of the elves are descended from the same folk that awoke in Cuiviénen in the earliest days of the First Age, well before the rising of the sun. They dwelt there for many years before being discovered by Arome, one of the Ainur, who summoned them to a man. Many agreed and became Aldar, the High Elves. The others who refused were called Avari, the Unwilling. Not all the Aldar arrived in a man though. The Sindar turned back before crossing the Great Sea, and even some of those that did end up crossing, the Noldor later rebelled and returned to Middle-earth. But nevertheless, the Eldar as a group were still considered nobler than the Avari. The Avari themselves remained in Middle-earth and spread all over. At the time of the War of the Ring, the Elven countries, Lothlorien, Northern Mirkwood, Rivendell, these were ruled by Eldar, but mainly populated by the Avari. According to the legend, preserved in almost identical form among both the Elves of Aman and the Sindar, the three clans were in the beginning derived from the three elf fathers, Imin, Tata, and Enel, so they had at first simply the names Minya firsts, Tatcha seconds, and Nelia thirds. These numbered, out of the original 144 elves that first awoke, 14, 56, and 74, and these proportions were approximately maintained until the separation. Long after these sunderings, these painful separations would come quick and fast ever afterward, as not all the Quendi made it to a man or grew up in the light of the two great trees of Valinor. The Light Elves are the Vanyar, first tribe of the elves, none of whom became Avari. They stayed in Aman after the making of the Great Journey. The Deep Elves are the Noldor, most famous of the tribes, and the Sea Elves are the Teleri. Strictly speaking, Teleri refers to a larger group which comprises the Nandor, the Sindar, and a third group called the Falmari, who eventually made it to the west to the Undying Lands of Aman. In practice though, Teleri generally refers to the Falmari. The most famous Teleri is likely Círdan the Shipwright, master of the Grey Havens. But those are only the elves who went to Aman. There are many more groups who didn't, of which the Wood Elves are one tribe. The Avari, sometimes called the Dark Elves, are not to be confused with the likes of Eöl the Dark Elf, who is so named for his character and not his dwelling, and I do in fact have a video on this very interesting character if you wish to learn more on him. Rather though, they are so called because they split from the first group of three at the Sundering of the Elves, a continuing event which took place after the three groups were invited to Aman shortly after their awakening. The ones who were unwilling to leave Middle-earth became known as the Avari, meaning unwilling, that is, unwilling to go into the west. Then befell the first sundering of the elves, for the kindred of Ingwe, and the most part of the kindreds of Finwë and Elwë were swayed by the words of their lords, and were willing to depart and follow Arome, and these were known ever after as the Eldar, by the name that Arome gave to the elves in the beginning, in their own tongue. But many refused the summons, preferring the starlight and the wide spaces of Middle-earth to the rumour of the trees, and these are the Avari, the unwilling, and they were sundered in that time from the Eldar, and met never again until many ages were past. This split occurred in the year of the trees 1105, which gives us the context on the high antiquity of the elves, as these events occurred some 11,000 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings. When the elves who chose Aman were called the Eldar though, some of them stopped at the Misty Mountains in the years of the trees 1115, and they would go no further. These were named Nandor. The Teleri lived long in Middle-earth and so wished to remain, but the Vanyar and Noldor would continue on the great journey with Arome, who led them through the mountains. When Arome went forward, the Teleri were afraid of the great and shadowy heights, and so refused to continue onward. Those who remained became a people apart, the Nandor, and each of them loved the sea and dwelt long by the rivers and streams of Middle-earth, and had great knowledge of and love for all living things, trees and herbs, birds and beasts, more so than all other elves. In years later, Denethor, son of Lenwek, turned again west at last, and led a part of the remnant of that people over the mountains and into Beleriand. The final major sundering occurred in the years of the trees 1132, when one of the Elven kings, Elwë, became lost and his people stayed behind to look for him. Elwë would later return and be renamed Eleuthingol, and his people came to be known as the Sindar. Sindar was the name given by the exiled Noldor to the second largest of the divisions of the Eldar. It was applied to all the elves of Telerian origin that the Noldor found in Beleriand, though it later excluded the Nandor, except those who were the direct subjects of Elwë, or had become merged with his people. The name meant the Grey or the Grey Elves. So there we have it, a look at the beginning of the history of the elves. We've looked at their awakening and how they were divided up into the different clans that they would be known by, and I will admit it can be quite confusing at times. There are so many different names, so many different things to remember. I hope this has helped you just that little bit. But really that is all we are going to cover in today's video. But would you be interested in seeing how the elves changed after the Great Journey? Would you like to see what comes next in the history of the elven race? Let me know in the comment section below if you would. It is told that even as Varda ended her labours, and they were long, when first Menelmacar strode up the sky and the blue fire of Helluin flickered in the mists above the borders of the world, in that hour the children of the earth awoke, the firstborn of Ilúvatar. By the starlit mere of Cuivianen, water of awakening, they rose from the sleep of Ilúvatar, and while they dwelt yet silent by Cuivianen, their eyes beheld first of all things the stars of heaven. Therefore they have ever loved the starlight, and have revered Varda Elentari above all the Valar. Let's start at the very beginning. The elves, known as the Quendi, meaning those who speak, were the first children of Ilúvatar, awakening in Middle-earth long before the likes of men. They awoke at the lake called Cuivianen, under the stars, as the sun and moon had not yet been created. But even at the very moment of their awakening, they were divided into different clans. There were precisely 144 elves at the awakening, and they were split into 3 groups. The Minyar, which means the firsts, and this consisted of 14 elves. The Tachar, meaning the seconds, a group of 56, and then the Nelyar, the largest group with 74, whose name means the thirds. These divisions would be crucial because they shaped the future of the elves. These 3 groups would eventually evolve into the key elvish clans we know from the stories, the Vanyar, Noldor and Teleri, but we're not quite there yet. After their awakening, the elves were discovered by the Valar Arome, one of the godlike powers of the world. Arome loved the elves and invited them to come live with the Valar in Valinor, the blessed realm across the sea. This invitation led to the first major division amongst these people. Some of the elves chose to follow Arome on what became known as the Great Journey to Valinor. Those who embarked on this journey became known as the Eldar, or the People of the Stars. But not all elves wanted to leave their home. A significant number refused the invitation and remained in Middle-earth. These were called the Avari, or the Unwilling. The Avari would never see the light of Valinor, and they stayed in Middle-earth, becoming more scattered and less involved in the major events of the ages, and some would even become the ancestors of the Wood Elves and other lesser-known groups. So, right from the start, the elves were split into 2 major camps, those who wanted to see the light of the two trees in Valinor, and those who stayed behind. Now, let's first focus on the elves who began the journey to Valinor, the Eldar. They were further divided into 3 major groups based on their clans. We have the Vanyar. These were the first and smallest group to arrive in Valinor. Known for their golden hair and beauty, they were considered the most noble and spiritual among the elves. The Vanyar remained in Valinor and were closely associated with the Valar, rarely returning to Middle-earth. They were the most devoted to the Valar and lived in peace in the Blessed Realm. One of the most notable of these being Ingwe, the High King who became leader of all the elves who dwelt in the Blessed Realm. Then we have the Noldor. And the Noldor, probably the most famous of the elven groups. Known for their skill in craftsmanship, knowledge and ambition, the Noldor were led by Finwë. Their story is tied to the greatest events in the First Age, including the forging of the Silmarils by FEANOR. They are the Deep Elves, or Wise Elves, though sometimes their wisdom led to pride and tragedy. Again, yes, looking at you, FEANOR. The Noldor were the most active in Middle-earth, establishing great kingdoms like Gondolin, Nargothrond, and the realm of Finrod Felagund. And finally we have the Teleri. The Teleri were the largest and most varied group. They were lovers of the sea and the natural world, and many of them didn't make it all the way to Valinor. Those who did became known as the Falmari, or Sea Elves, and lived on the shores of Valinor. Others, like the Sindar and Nandor, stayed behind in Middle-earth, forming their own cultures and realms. Let's firstly look at the Sindar. These are the ones known as the Grey Elves. The Sindar were led by Elwë, later known as Thingol, who fell in love with the Maya Melian and decided to stay in Middle-earth. They formed the kingdom of Doriath in Beleriand and became one of the most significant elven cultures. Thingol, along with his wife Melian, ruled over the Sindar for centuries, and their culture flourished. Although the Sindar didn't see the light of Valinor, they were still considered noble elves, largely because of that connection to Thingol and Melian. And then we have the Nandor. These were the elves who broke away from the Teleri during their journey west. They didn't want to cross the Misty Mountains, so they settled along the Anduin River. Over time, they became known as the Wood Elves, or Sylvan Elves, and they lived in places like Mirkwood and Lothlorien. The Sylvan Elves were more rustic and lived simpler lives compared to their noble cousins. Leaders like Thranduil and Legolas are from this group, though Thranduil himself was Sindarin, not Sylvan, just to make things a little more confusing. And now, let's not forget about the Avari as well, who never embarked on that journey to Valinor. They had remained hidden in Middle-earth and became quite diverse. Tolkien wrote less about them, but they likely lived in small isolated communities and had little involvement in the major events of Middle-earth. Some, as mentioned earlier, may have been captured and twisted by Morgoth to become orcs, although this is very much one of the debated points in the lore. But now with that covered, you might have also heard these terms before, Calaquendi and Morroquendi. While these names come from whether an elf has seen the light of the two trees in Valinor. The Calaquendi being the Elves of the Light. These were the Vanyar, Noldor and Teleri who reached Valinor. They saw the light of the two trees and were forever blessed by it. And then the Morroquendi. These are the Elves of the Darkness. These were the Avari and those elves who stayed behind in Middle-earth and never saw the light of the two trees. Even some of the Sindar were considered Morroquendi by the Calaquendi despite their noble status. This distinction wasn't just about light and dark, it also carried cultural and even moral connotations. To the Calaquendi, being a Morroquendi often implied a lack of wisdom or nobility, though this wasn't always fair. For example, Thingol himself was considered a Morroquendi because he never returned to Valinor, but he was one of the most powerful and important elven lords ever to exist in Middle-earth. It goes to show it's not all black and white. But then, as times move forward a bit, after the rebellion of the Noldor and their return to Middle-earth, the term High Elves came into use. These were the elves that had seen the light of Valinor and returned to Middle-earth, mainly being the Noldor. The High Elves, especially the Noldor, played a huge role in shaping the events of the First Age. Great figures like FEANOR, Fingolfin, and Galadriel were all High Elves. The Noldor established powerful kingdoms, fought Morgoth in the War of the Jewels, and shaped the fate of Middle-earth through their deeds and their downfall. Their knowledge, craft, and pride often set them apart from other elves, for better or even for worse. So as we move forward again, by the Third Age now, the Elves of Middle-earth had largely dwindled, but we still see important groups like the Sindar and Sylvan Elves playing key roles. For example, you had Thranduil's kingdom in Mirkwood. This was primarily a Sylvan realm, although like I mentioned earlier, Thranduil himself was a Sindarin elf. Mirkwood, once a great forest, became a shadowed and dangerous place under the influence of Sauron, but the kingdom still remained. And then we also have Lothlorien. Here we have the union of Noldor and Sindar cultures, as Galadriel, a Noldo, ruled alongside her husband Celeborn, a Sindar. The Galathrim, or Tree People, were largely Sylvan elves who had been influenced by the wisdom and culture of Galadriel and Celeborn. The elves in the Third Age were really a shadow of their former selves, but they still played crucial roles in the events of the likes of the Lord of the Rings, helping guide the Free Peoples in the fight against Sauron. So although their power may have dwindled, being an elf was still a great thing. So there we have it. The elves, with all their complexities and divisions, are truly one of the most fascinating aspects of Tolkien's legendarium. From their awakening in the Years of the Trees to their roles in the downfall of Sauron, the elves have shaped Middle-earth in profound ways. Whether it's the wisdom of the Vanyar, the artistry of the Noldor, or the simple yet deep connection to the nature of the Sylvan elves, each group has its own unique story and legacy. Hopefully after this video you have a much clearer understanding of just who's who among the elves and why they matter.
Well, here we are at last, said Gandalf. Here the Elven way from Hollin ended. Holly was the token of the people of that land, and they planted it here to mark the end of their domain, for the West Door was made chiefly for their use in their traffic with the Lords of Moria. Those were happier days, when there was still close friendship at times between folk of different race, even between dwarves and elves. It was not the fault of the dwarves that the friendship waned, said Gimli. I have not heard that it was the fault of the elves, said Legolas. I have heard both, said Gandalf, and I will not give judgment now, but I beg you to, Legolas and Gimli, at least to be friends, and to help me. I need you both. The doors are shut and hidden, and the sooner we find them, the better. Night is at hand.
It has been made well known from the movies that the dwarves and the elves do not tend to get along from our viewings of Legolas and Gimli as well as Thorin and Thranduil. But where did this all start? After all, there is not the same kind of rivalry between the likes of dwarves and men, for example. Well, first things first. To put a blanket statement out of all dwarves and all elves hate each other is not really correct. There are several different groups that make up each of these races, and they do not all share the same relationships and feelings as each other. But to start with, I think we should look at what is considered to be the most important moment that created the tensions between these peoples. To do this, we need to travel back to the times of the First Age of Middle-earth and focus on the elves, or more specifically, at the group known as the Sindar Elves. Now for those of you who aren't sure, these were originally Telerin elves, who would come to make their home in Beleriand under King Thingol, who is an elf that is the father of Luthien from the famous Beren and Luthien tale. The greatest host came last, and they were named the Teleri, for they tarried on the road, and were not wholly of a mind to pass from the dusk to the light of Valinor. In water they had great delight, and those that came at last to the western shores were enamoured of the sea. The sea elves, therefore, they became in the land of Aman, the Falmeri, for they made music beside the breaking waves. As that quote shows, the Teleri loved the waters and the trees, and these traits would stay with this group as they became known as the group of the Sindar. These Sindar would also go by the name of Grey People, as they would go their own way when they chose to reject the invitation to take the Great Journey. So, although they were Eldar, they never beheld the light of the two trees of Valinor. And despite this, they still became some of the most skilled and wisest of any of the Elves of Middle-earth. This would also lead them to being referred to as the Elves of the Twilight. Now, in the early days of the First Age, most dwarves and elves had been allies, even to the point that the piece of jewellery known as the Necklace of the Dwarves, or more famously as the Nauglamir, would be crafted by dwarves from the Blue Mountains using gems from Valinor, and it would be considered a piece of jewellery with incredible beauty and grace. It was also considered to be the most prized treasure in Nargothrond, and the most famed dwarven work of the Elder Days, as it stood as a symbol of the alliance between the elves and dwarves. But like I said, this was not made by the dwarves for the dwarves. No, it was made for Finrod Felagund, who was the elven king of another group of the elves called the Noldor Elves, and these were the second group of the elves to make their way to a man. Finrod was best known for being a king of the Noldor, the eldest son of Finarfin, and brother to Galadriel, Angrod, and Aignor. The First Age would reach the year 495, and the battles of Beleriand would be taking many lives. Here, the forces of Morgoth would attack the city of Nargothrond and destroy it, as the leader of this army was Glaurung. Glaurung was the father of the dragons. His power was great and terrifying, for he was a fire-breathing dragon who could both talk and understand speech as well. The only thing Glaurung really lacked was the ability of flight. The destruction he would unleash during this event would lead it to becoming known as the Sack of Nargothrond, and Glaurung would then remain here afterwards, collecting all treasures he could find, including the Nauglamir, and sitting in the ruins. His hoard would grow, and amongst it the necklace would remain for a great time. And you may be wondering at this point as well, just why is this necklace so important? Well, trust me, it will become apparent very shortly. Just feel sometimes a bit of the backstory behind it all helps you get a better understanding of more of the story. But jumping back into it, the Nauglamir would be here until the man named Hurin Thalion, of who the story of the Children of Hurin is written regarding, would make his way to the ruins of Nargothrond and recover the Nauglamir, with him then taking it to Doriath. The Nauglamir was now in the hands of Thingol in Doriath thanks to Hurin. Thingol wished to add to this necklace though, and not just with anything, but he wanted to add the Silmaril of Beren and Luthien onto it. So, Thingol asked the dwarves of Nogrod to come and help him with this task, of which the dwarves agreed. However, when their work was done, the dwarves became so infatuated by this beautiful thing before them that they turned around and demanded that they keep the jewellery as payment for their work. They claimed that the Nauglamir was never made for Thingol, it had been made for Finrod, but now that Finrod had died, it should now belong to the dwarves that made it again. However, Thingol would see this as they just wished for the Silmaril, so he sent them on their way with no payment at all, insulting them greatly. And this is where the first drop of hatred may have truly begun. These dwarves would not take this insult lying down, and so they slew Thingol. However, only 2 of the dwarves would actually make it out of Doriath alive, and then return home to Nogrod in the Blue Mountains. Here, when questioned about how they came into the necklace, they would lie. They would claim that Thingol had ordered them to be killed after their work was complete, so that he would not have to pay. This raised the want for revenge within the dwarves of Nogrod, so they raised an army in anger and rage and marched to avenge their kin, all from a lie. This would begin the event that would be known as the Battle of the Thousand Caves, where so many casualties would be suffered. The dwarves would be victorious in stealing back their treasure, with them finally reaching the treasury where the necklace lay, with Mablung, the captain and marchwarden of the once King Elu Thingol, stood. But although he was mighty, this elf could not withstand the dwarven power and so fell at its doors. This attack would not go unheard of though, for the word of what they did spread very fast throughout Middle-earth, and on their return journey they were attacked in revenge by Elves of Osiriand, some Ents, and these were all led by Beren. And in this attack, all on the side of the dwarves were killed. Beren now took the Nauglamir himself and gave it to Luthien, but the rest of that story is not relevant for today. So, that is definitely the event that can be considered to have driven a big wedge between the races, which, just like most of the events from the First Age, was caused due to the beautiful effects of the Silmarils. And this kept long in the memories of both races, with each believing that they had been betrayed by the other, even to the point that it is shown in the quote from the very start of this video from The Lord of the Rings, where Legolas has only heard the tales that it is the fault of the dwarves, where Gimli has only heard tales that it is the fault of the elves. And you can only imagine, over time, just hearing one side of the story, these feelings and opinions and the drasticness of the story was most likely just increased after every telling. It is a sad thing to know when so many facts were left unknown. But that is not the sole moment though. There is another factor that could have had some influence on their relationship, and that is to do with the petty dwarves. Now, for those of you who are unsure of just who or what these are, the petty dwarves are a group of their race that have been members of several other of the clans of the dwarves, but these ones are those who had been exiled from the eastern dwarven cities. However, the reasons for these exilings have never actually been specified, but we can make a couple of logical guesses. They were different from normal dwarves. They were smaller in size and far less sociable, so in some ways they could have been considered as almost the runts of the litter if you want to think of it in that way, and maybe just excluded for that. But that is just my thought. But there's also the fact that they would happily give away their Khuzdul names, which is also a likely reason to be exiled by the dwarves, as all other dwarves kept their Khuzdul names and language a secret from basically all others. That was theirs and theirs alone, so little is known about it. So for them to give it away freely, it would very much be frowned upon by the others. Now, these petty dwarves were the first to cross the Ered Luin in the First Age, coming to Beleriand before any of the elves had arrived themselves. However, when the Sindar elves would arrive, they began to hunt these petty dwarves. After all, they had no experience with dwarves at all at this point, so they mistook them for animals. And it was not until the dwarves of Belagost and Nogrod would eventually make contact with the elves that they realised what these small humanoid beings actually were. The elves would leave the petty dwarves alone after this, but their numbers were now so few and they had been driven out of their homes that the petty dwarves now held an everlasting hatred for the elves. We need to remember though, although this specific group held such a deep hatred for the elves, the petty dwarves had nearly died out by the end of the Wars of Beleriand in the year 587 of the First Age. So although it is possible that the dwarves did keep a memory of the way these petty dwarves were treated, it is unlikely that this would have made too much of an impact on the other houses of the dwarves, as, again, you got to remember, this group had been exiled, so they're probably not held too highly. And now, before I wrap up this video, there's actually one more point I would like to add. And this is more of a theory than something that can be backed up by documented events. But still, I am curious to see what you all think. So, if we go back to the very beginning, to the creations of the races, first we had the children of Ilúvatar, who are the elves, and they were meant to come first. However, the Valar Aule would go and create the dwarves in secret after becoming impatient with having to wait so long for the first children to arrive. Aule just wished to be able to teach his lore and crafts to these new beings, and he just got fed up of waiting. And this little bit actually explains why the dwarves are different looking, like they're shorter, as Aule had never seen an elf to base any of his attempted creations off. This was in fact against Ilúvatar's ways, as only Ilúvatar could create life, but nonetheless, Ilúvatar granted life to what would be the dwarves after Aule initially expected to have to destroy them all, but they would have to sleep until after the children of Ilúvatar would awaken first. So, this means that the elves are the children of the Creator's choice, whereas the dwarves are the children that were, in want of a better term, adopted. Therefore, This kind of situation is always likely to leave some degree of jealousy between the pair, even if they don't really know why that is. They were rival creations from the very beginning, who possessed opposite ways of life. One of them loved the trees and the sea, whereas the others loved stone and mining. It was almost written in the stars that they would always be destined to challenge each other one way or another. But again, I will emphasize that section is just one of my opinion. There's not really fact to back that up. It's just an idea. So there we have it. These are the main reasons I could find for their rivalry and hatred towards each other. I do believe that the main trigger for the tension in their friendships has to be down to the events of Thingol, the Dwarves of Noldor, and the Nauglamir. And this mistrust would generally remain throughout the ages, but that may never have been avoidable if the theory with Ilúvatar comes into things. But in spite of this, it is important to also note that actually a great number of dwarves and elves did get along okay, or even very well indeed. As just one example of this, we have the dwarves of Khazad-dûm getting on very well with the elves of Eregion in the times of Narvi and Celebrimbor during the Second Age. It is not to say it never happened, it just sadly gets overshadowed by the hatred of their past. Language is so important to Tolkien, he literally said, of all the world, I will dedicate my life to this. And why? Is it seemingly mundane? Perhaps for some, but like the characters in Tolkien's fiction, our names are derivative of past words which came from languages that are now deceased. But not only does a language form part of one's idea of self, it gives expression to our soul. Indeed, Eru Ilúvatar himself brought all that is and will be into being by the way of song, words, and melodies so subtle they wove into being everything. But you might be wondering, what has all of this got to do with a day that shook Middle-earth? After all, if you think of the biggest threats that came from the early years, you are likely to go straight to the wars between gods, or the moments that changed from when Melkor and Ungoliant came to Valinor under a cloak of darkness. These are actions that almost literally shook the ground of Middle-earth. Yet, language, words, a speech, an oath, this is something that can have just as much, if not more, impact on all things. The world-shaking bit might seem underwhelming at first, but it is but a speech. A heated speech by FEANOR, son of Finwë, High King of the Noldor. For those of you who do not know much about this elven family, Finwë was not just the king of the Noldor, but he was the first king of the Noldor. He was the leader who led his people from Middle-earth to Valinor in the earlier years, and he would have 3 sons and 2 daughters. 2 sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin, and 2 daughters, Findis and Irime with Indis, and 1 son with Miriel named FEANOR. His son FEANOR was said to be the greatest of the Noldor to have ever lived. He had incredible skill with his hands and with his words. So not only was he a truly great warrior, but he also possessed the skill to create the Silmarils themselves. Those very Silmarils that in fact led to so many wars and death throughout the years. Even the direct death of his father as Morgoth had gone to steal those Silmarils after draining the trees with Ungoliant. FEANOR was certainly a genius, but it is hard to argue not a bit of a madman as well. It was not just the Silmarils he created though, as he had many other great achievements too. He forged the Palantiri, used many years later as almost like inventing the telephone in Middle-earth, followed by the Fëanorian lamps. These lamps are once described as crystals hung in a fine chain net, the crystals being ever shining with an inner blue radiance. These were crafted in Valinor, but their method was lost with the Noldor, so that flame that could not be extinguished by wind or water sadly was not a thing to last, but another example of something FEANOR created that could not be copied. Just these couple of achievements though show FEANOR's quality. However, like I said, he is also somewhat of a madman. He possessed rash decision making and the inability to dial it back from 11 for a moment, as that is what drives the flame inside him, and he is able to impart that same desire onto others, as a great flame is able to lend life to smaller candles if they come forward and kneel. But the published material is silent on the main point. What we have in the published The Silmarillion says only that FEANOR swore a terrible oath, which is terrible for eager Feanor fans who want to hear his words if only once more. However, we did get a version of it later on. Tolkien's heroes are not always black and white heroic, and because they draw the narrative focus, this sometimes confuses the issue of whom we should root for. Whose side do we want to win? This is an important question, and one that can get really muddled and confused with the likes of Feanor, a great elf with good intentions, but perhaps an awful method of going about it. Especially when weighed against a terrible oath, for example, and all the evils entailed thereupon and ever after. So, to quote the speech itself now, we will take it from the chapter of the Annals of a Man from the History of Middle-earth series titled Morgoth's Ring. Be he foe or friend, be he foul or clean, brood of Morgoth or bright valour, Alder or Maya or aftercomer, man yet unborn upon Middle-earth, neither law nor love, nor league of swords, dread nor danger, not doom itself, shall defend him from Feanor and Feanor's king, who so hideth or hoardeth, or in hand taketh, finding keepeth, or afar casteth a Silmaril. This swear we all. Death we will deal him ere day's ending. Woe until world's end. Our word hear though, Eru Allfather, to the everlasting. Darkness doom us if our deed faileth. On the holy mountain here in witness, and our vow remember, Manwë and Vardar. The actual words might not have anything that immediately jumps out at you over someone who is just a bit angry, but when we consider Professor Tolkien's faith, his general lack of, well, appreciation for the vain and self-seeking, self-righteous among his creation, yet the deed is much fouler than words can convey meaningfully. This oath was sworn at a time that Morgoth had already taken all three of the Silmarils into his possession. Morgoth had murdered Finwë, his father, and taken his most prized possessions. Feanor and his sons swore they would not rest until this was rectified. Feanor chose to lead a great host of elves back to Middle-earth to take on Morgoth, to challenge him, and make him pay, and so they started a war. In the end though, Feanor was killed, but it was due to his 7 sons having sworn this self-same terrible oath that meant it did not die with him. Feanor had fought bravely against a force of Balrogs, but fell. But the sons of Feanor kept his words. It was tough to see, though, that the sons would take the oath as far as they needed to. This became most apparent after the actions of Beren and Luthien. These two managed to recover one of the Silmarils from the very darks of Angband, but this did not mean that it was returned to the sons. So they attacked their king for it. Not once, when they destroyed Doriath, murdering King Thingol's heir, Dior, but also at the mouths of Sirion when Dior's daughter, Elwing, took it there. These events come under the conflict known as either the Ruin of Doriath or the Second Kinslaying. And for those of you interested, the sons still did not gain the Silmaril here either, for Elwing gave it to her husband, Eärendil, who sailed with it into the west. The same Elwing and Eärendil who would be the parents of the twin half-elven sons, Elrond and Elros. With the most hideous of acts done, that did not spell the end of the oath though, as Morgoth still held 2 Silmarils. After the War of Wrath, there were just 2 of the Oath-takers still breathing and living, Maethros and Maglor. They would steal the Silmarils, but discover a damning thing when they obtained them at last. They thought it was done, they thought the oath could be put to rest. But no. Due to the evils they had committed from that very oath, they could not handle these jewels of beauty. The pain they felt in handling them would only drive them to insanity. Therefore, Maethros would throw himself, along with the Silmaril, into the depths of the earth, while Maglor threw his Silmaril into the deep ocean. And so with that, all but one of the sons of Feanor, all but one of those who took the oath, would die, and the only one who lived was said to just wander the shores of the world, unable to deal with all the loss and regrets that he held within him. So there we have it, our second entry into the days that shook Middle-earth and how the Oath of FEANOR basically cursed an entire line of elves. FEANOR was without a doubt one of the greatest elves to have ever stepped foot on both Middle-earth and a man. He was one of the greatest warriors to ever draw breath, and one of the greatest smiths to ever wield a hammer. When even his grandson Celebrimbor, the one who forged the Rings of Power, knew that he could not quite match up to his grandfather, it can only emphasize just how great his skill truly was. However, with all that skill and power, there also came some maddening. He became so infatuated with the Silmarils he created that he could not stand the thought of someone like Morgoth possessing them, to the point that he would bring his own sons into an oath that would all but curse the rest of their lives. So although it was not an action like a murder itself, the words of FEANOR caused more harm than many swords swung ever could, and that is why we have wanted to have a look at it for our second entry into the days that shook Middle-earth. The day of that oath changed so much that came after it.
These are forged in Gondolin by the High Elves of the First Age.
In an age of exile and shadow, when the wrath of Morgoth had broken kingdoms and shattered the Noldor to ruin, one elf dreamed of a hidden light. That elf was Turgon, son of Fingolfin, a lord of the Noldor whose heart still longed for the beauty of Valinor. While others raised their blades in open defiance of the Dark Lord, Turgon sought a different kind of strength. It was Ulmo, the Lord of the Waters, who came to him in dream. This valor spoke of a secret valley hidden by encircling mountains, a place where Morgoth's gaze could not reach, a refuge untouched by his corruption. And thou shalt bring to fruition all that thou hast designed, and lo, it shall be the fairest dwelling of any king of the Noldor, and long shall it endure. And there thou shalt bring together the remnant of thy people, and they shall dwell in peace, and no evil shall come near them while thy realm endures. Guided by this vision, Turgon found the hidden valley of Tumladen, a green plain surrounded by encircling mountains that rose like a wall against the world. There he laid the foundations of Gondolin, the hidden rock, and filled it with all the beauty the elves had lost. It was said that Gondolin shone like a vision of Tirion before the darkening of Valinor. White towers, golden domes, and walls of pearl and marble rose beneath the mountain peaks. Its gates were sevenfold, its streets bright with song, and its people believed themselves untouched by shadow. And for many years, they were. From the outside world, Gondolin became only a whisper, a legend carried in the wind. None entered without Turgon's will, and none who found it ever left. The king decreed secrecy above all else. But isolation breeds pride, and pride in Middle-earth always draws the eye of Morgoth. For centuries, Gondolin was a dream made real, the last untouched jewel of the Noldor in a world already swallowed by darkness. Turgon ruled from the king's tower in the heart of the city, surrounded by marble courts and crystal fountains. The light of Gondolin shone with a purity that recalled the blessed realm itself, and many said it was fairer even than Tirion upon Tuna. In the midst of the plain rose the city of white marble, and its walls and its towers were tall and strong and fair. Behind the seven gates of the mountains, Gondolin flourished in secret. Its people, the Gondolindrim, built great houses named for the Valar, and their banners flew in the high winds of Tumladen. The House of the Golden Flower, the House of the Fountain, the House of the White Wing. Each was both a family and a brotherhood of warriors, artisans, and dreamers. In the hidden courts, songs were sung to Elbereth, and the light of the trees was remembered in their craft. To those within, Gondolin was paradise reborn, untouched, unbroken, and, hopefully, eternal. But no city built in Arda could remain so forever. Turgon's decree forbidding any from leaving the valley was born from fear of discovery, and perhaps fear of loss. Yet, in sealing Gondolin from the world, he also sealed it from change. The people forgot that safety without sacrifice became stagnation, and though Morgoth's eye could not yet find the city, his shadow had already begun to creep toward it. For beyond the mountains, in the dark lands of Angband, Morgoth had not forgotten Turgon, nor the Valar who had aided him. He would bide his time. He would let Gondolin grow proud and bright and certain of its safety, and when the moment came, he would strike with all the ruin of the world behind him. The beauty of Gondolin was unmatched, but beneath its white walls, the seeds of its fall were already sown. If Gondolin's walls kept out the armies of Morgoth, they could not keep out envy, and envy would prove to be the truest traitor of all. Far beyond the encircling mountains, in the dark forest of Nan Elmoth, there lived Eol, the Dark Elf. He was kin to the Sindar, but loved the night and shadow more than light. There he dwelt with Aredhel, sister of Turgon, whom he had lured to his halls and taken to wife. Their son was Maeglin, gifted in metalwork like his father and proud like his mother. But he looked westward towards Gondolin, the hidden city he had never seen, and longed to find it. He defied Eol's will, fled with Aredhel, and sought refuge with Turgon. When they reached Gondolin, Eol followed in wrath, and when Turgon refused to let him leave, Eol cast a poisoned spear at Maeglin, but Aredhel leapt before it, and so was slain. For that crime, Eol was thrown from the city walls, and as he fell his curse ran out, that Maeglin's doom would be no less than his own. Then Maeglin stood by the king's side and gazed out, and said nothing, but he watched the fall of his father with unflinching eyes. In Gondolin, Maeglin grew powerful, a smith of unmatched skill and one of Turgon's closest counsellors. Yet his heart was never at peace. He loved Celebrindel, Turgon's daughter, whose grace was beyond his reach. When Tuor, a mortal man sent by Ulmo, came to Gondolin and won Idril's heart, Maeglin's envy became despair. Still, his true fall came years later. While seeking ore in the mountains beyond the city, Maeglin was captured by orcs. He pleaded with them to take him before Morgoth rather than slay him. There, in the Dark Lord's shadowed halls, his courage would break. Morgoth promised him his life with Idril's love if he revealed Gondolin's location. So, out of both fear and desire, Maeglin agreed. And Maeglin, being in dread, betrayed the location of the city. When he returned, he spoke nothing of what had passed, but the fate of Gondolin had already been sealed. Long years passed after Maeglin's betrayal. Gondolin remained at peace, its people believing themselves safe, even as Morgoth's armies gathered in the north. Then, on the festival of the Gates of Summer, the end came. The people of Gondolin had risen before dawn to greet the sunrise, but instead of light in the east, they saw fire in the north. The mountains shook, the plains of Tumladen burned, and over the peaks poured the hosts of Morgoth, dragons, balrogs, wolves, and countless orcs. There came over the mountains a great noise, and the fire of the dragons kindled the plain, and the city was encircled by fire. The seven gates fell one by one, the white city turned red, balrogs and dragons broke the walls, and the fair streets of Gondolin became rivers of flame. In the chaos Maeglin struck, seizing Idril and trying to throw her child, Eärendil, from the walls. Tuor came upon him, and they fought amidst the smoke and ruin. And Tuor took Maeglin by the neck and cast him from the walls, and he fell to his death amid the flames below. Elsewhere, the lords of the 12 houses fell one by one. Ecthelion of the Fountain slew Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, in the king's square, with both perishing in the fountain's depths. They fell together into the king's fountain, and both were slain. Within the tower of the king, Turgon refused to flee. He stood fast until the tower fell, and with it, the last High King of Gondolin. And mighty was its fall, and the fall of Turgon in its ruin. Tuor and Idril gathered the survivors and led them into the hidden passage Idril had prepared long before, a narrow tunnel beneath the mountains that opened far from the plain. But even there, Morgoth's reach found them. At Cirith Thorenath, the eagles descended to drive off pursuing orcs, while Glorfindel, lord of the Golden Flower, faced a Balrog alone upon the high pass. He fought with the Balrog upon a pinnacle of rock, and they both fell into the abyss. The eagles recovered his body, bearing it with honour from the heights. By dawn, Gondolin was no more. The valley burned behind them, and the light of Turgon's city was lost forever. But hope had escaped the fire, carried in the arms of Idril and Tuor, and in the eyes of their son.
The survivors fled south through shadowed valleys and silent woods until they came to the mouths of Sirion, where other exiles of Beleriand had gathered. There by the sea they built new homes, fragile but free. Eärendil grew to manhood among the waves, always gazing west toward a light he could not reach. Eärendil was a mariner that tarried in Arvernian. He built a ship of great lightness, and he was borne ever upon the sea. He would one day sail beyond the world itself to beg the Valar for mercy, a plea that would end Morgoth's dominion and bring about the War of Wrath. So Gondolin's fall was not its end. Through its ruin, the world was actually saved. The blood of Gondolin flowed into two great lines, through Elrond, who would heal Middle-earth, and through Elros, who had found Númenor. From their descendants would come Aragorn, the last of that same bloodline, the legacy of Turgon's hidden hope. The city was lost, but its light endured in the hearts of those who carried its memory. The Fall of Gondolin was Tolkien's first great tale, the prototype of every tragedy he would ever write. He penned it in the wake of the First World War, haunted by the fire and the ruin of modern battle. Gondolin's towers were born from his memories of cities burning, its dragons from the smoke and machines that filled his sky. But like all of Tolkien's tragedies, it is not a story of despair. It is about endurance. For of the fall of Gondolin came the escape of Eärendil, and through Eärendil came the hope of elves and men. From destruction came renewal. From betrayal came redemption. From the ashes of the hidden city rose the light that would guide every age to come. Gondolin fell, but through its fall the music of the Ainur played on, deeper, sadder, and more beautiful than before. So there we have it. What actually is the Fall of Gondolin? Well, Gondolin was a hidden city with walls that would fall, but with light that would endure. From its ashes came Eärendil's star, the hope of all who lived after. Through its ruin the world was remade, for even in defeat the fire of the First Age lit the way for every age that followed. Gondolin's fall reminds us that in Tolkien's world, loss is never the end, only the beginning of renewal. As more and more begins to be spoiled or revealed about Amazon's The Lord of the Rings show, I thought it would be a great time to look at one of the more key figures to be around during the Second Age of Middle-earth. So that means today I'll be looking at the Elven King, also known as the High King of the Noldor, GIL-GALAD. Although a good chunk of his story takes place during the Second Age, there is of course a small amount of history recorded of him before this time, so let's start off by going way back and seeing what we know about his beginnings. It is recorded that Iranian was given the name GIL-GALAD, Star of Radiance, because his helm and mail and his shield overlaid with silver and set with a device of white stars, shone from afar like a star in sunlight or moonlight, and could be seen by elvish eyes at a great distance if he stood upon a height. GIL-GALAD's early years are never noted in great detail. We do not know an exact year of his birth, but we do know it was at some point in the First Age of Middle-earth, generally considered at some time around the year 455. And quickly before we get into why we think this is, there is an issue to address already, and that is, who is GIL-GALAD's father? If you are familiar with the Silmarillion, then you probably think it is Fingon. However, his father has also been named as Orodreth elsewhere. Now, Christopher Tolkien has explained naming Fingon as GIL-GALAD's father in the Silmarillion was actually a mistake, as he had simply misunderstood one of his father's notes and just gone with it, and that in the end GIL-GALAD's true father most likely had to be Orodreth instead. So if he was 100% committed to this or not, we maybe cannot be sure, but this is what that can really be considered correct for now. And to add to this, as for GIL-GALAD's mother, we know far less, only really knowing that she was some unnamed Sindarin woman. But anyway, now that this has been addressed, let's go back to working out GIL-GALAD's age. So, as I started to say, the reason we can consider he was born around the year 455 of the First Age is that it is at least known that GIL-GALAD was a child at the time of the Fourth Great Battle of the Wars of Beleriand, with this one being famously fought between the Noldor against Morgoth. After the dust settled of this battle, many of the elven commanders had fallen, and then the aftermath brought about one of the greatest feats ever witnessed in Middle-earth. For Fingolfin rode alone to challenge Morgoth in single combat. And he rode with such fury that it is said that those who saw him thought Arome himself had come to their lands. However, Fingolfin, despite wounding Morgoth 7 times, fell to the Dark Lord, and this is what brought about the first move for GIL-GALAD. And remember, for this quote now, the Fingon mentioned should probably be Orodreth. Great was the lamentation in Hithlum when the fall of Fingolfin became known, and Fingon in sorrow took the lordship of the house of Fingolfin and the kingdom of the Noldor, but his young son, Iranian, who was after named GIL-GALAD, he sent to the Havens. So, GIL-GALAD and his mother have journeyed to their new home of the Havens of Falas so that they could be kept under the safekeeping of Círdan the Shipwright. As the years continued, Orodreth would suffer the loss of Minas Tirith, where he had held the position of warden. And no, not that Minas Tirith that you know from The Lord of the Rings. This one was a tower upon the island of Tol Sirion that guarded the pass of Sirion located between the Eredwethrin and Dorthonion. Morgoth would continue his attacks and soon control all of the northern realms of Beleriand, meaning he could now work his way south with far less opposition. And he did just that, with his forces attacking and sacking the havens of the Falas in the year 473 of the First Age. This meant that GIL-GALAD and those others who could make an escape managed to flee by boat to either the mouth of Sirion or the Isle of Balar. It is the mouth of Sirion where both Círdan and GIL-GALAD established their new haven, with the refuge on the Isle of Balar not being too far away as well. Then not too many years later, in 510 of the First Age, GIL-GALAD would become the latest High King of the Noldor after the death of King Turgon during the fall of Gondolin. Only a small group of exiles survived the fall of Gondolin, where they had Glorfindel hold off a Balrog for them to escape. And they passed over the mountains and eventually came to the refuge in the havens of Sirion in the following year to find their new king, GIL-GALAD. GIL-GALAD would take no part in the climax of the War of Wrath, and so both he and Círdan would remain where they were for the remainder of the First Age, and then time would move on into the Second. So, at this stage, as time comes into the Second Age of Middle-earth, if GIL-GALAD was believed to have been born in the year 455 of the First Age, then he would have been somewhere around 150 years old by this point. This means that he would have passed into the adulthood cycle of an elven life. Even if 150 was still quite young for someone of that race, he was still, at this point, an adult. But a more in-depth video about the life cycle of an elf is definitely one for another day. So anyway, this also means that this is where the potential now starts for the parts of his life that we could see in Amazon's show. So, the beginning of the Second Age started with an important founding. The founding of the region of Lindon in the Westlands, previously known as Ossiriand, and this came in the very first year. Here the elves build the Grey Havens in the newly formed Gulf of Lune. And this was important as this would be from where the Eldar would set sail to travel the straight road to Aman, the Blessed Realm. As GIL-GALAD was now the last heir of the kings of the Noldor, he was given the title of High King of the Elves of the West as well. Due to this reputation, many of the Sindar and Noldor elves came to join him. Not that all the years that followed would be completely peaceful though. Celebrimbor, the fifth son of Feanor, most noted for his creation of the Rings of Power, led a group of Noldor away to found their own realm of Eregion in the year 750. It is rumoured that they had been tempted by the whispers of Mithril being found within the realm of Khazad-dûm. There was not just this unrest though, for also members of the Sindar and Nandor possessed long memories, and this meant that they were not willing to live peacefully with the Noldor due to an event called the Second Kingslaying, or the Ruin of Doriath, where the sons of Feanor attacked Doriath in search for the Silmaril. But that again is a bigger story for another day. But what this did mean is that the elves instead moved eastwards to live in the realms like that of Lothlorien or Greenwood the Great, and that would obviously become Mirkwood by the times of the Lord of the Rings. As the years continued, GIL-GALAD and Círdan would receive a visitor from the Isle of Númenor, the prince named Aldarion. They would strike up a friendship with Aldarion after he had been ever impressed with everything he saw of the elves. In fact, after returning home, Aldarion quickly begged to be let to go back and revisit the elves once again in Lindon. GIL-GALAD would use this friendship to send Aldarion back home with a letter for the King of Numenor, who at that time was Tar Meneldur, and in it he would send a warning. A new shadow arises in the east. It is no tyranny of evil men, as your son believes, but a servant of Morgoth is stirring, and evil things wake again. Each year it gains in strength, for most men are ripe to its purpose. Not far off is the day, I judge, when it will become too great for the Eldar unaided to withstand. Therefore, whenever I behold a tall ship of the kings of men, my heart is eased, and now I make bold to seek your help. If you have any strength of men to spare, lend it to me, I beg. GIL-GALAD knew something dark was coming, and he wanted to be prepared. More years would roll on again though as we reached the end of the first millennium of the Second Age, and therefore around the year 1000, Sauron made his first attempt to deceive the elves, albeit the elves did not see it was him right away. Sauron had disguised himself to be fair to the eye, and gave himself the name of Annatar, the Lord of Gifts. However, from the off, both Círdan and GIL-GALAD could feel that something was not right. This person was not as they seemed, so they rejected his offers and turned him away. How things could have been different if they had not turned him away at this point, as instead he made his way to Eregion and the realm of Celebrimbor, where this time he was accepted and welcomed in, with the greed being a factor in blinding their sight. Here, Sauron would teach Celebrimbor, and Celebrimbor would come to forge the Rings of Power, and that would be around the year 1500 of the Second Age. Annatar would sit back and do nothing yet though, for 100 years later, Annatar went and forged the One Ring in secret. But that part of the story most of us will know a fair bit better. However, Sauron was unaware that after he had left Eregion, that Celebrimbor had forged 3 more rings as well. 3 rings that he was unable to touch. 3 rings that he was unable to taint. This meant that when Sauron put on his One Ring, in his attempt to control all other ring bearers, he revealed himself as he truly was. The elves realized that they had been betrayed. GIL-GALAD showed his instinct was right. From this moment though, Sauron demanded the return of these 3 extra rings that were forged, as they could not have been created without him sharing his knowledge. Rightfully, they were his. However, Celebrimbor managed to send these away just in time, sending Valia and Narya to GIL-GALAD and Círdan respectively, while Nenya was gifted to Galadriel. This meant that in the year 1693 of the Second Age, the War of the Elves and Sauron began. The War of the Elves and Sauron would last for 8 years in total, reaching its climax in 1701 of the Second Age, but it all started with Sauron initially launching his attacks on Eregion. To combat and help this, GIL-GALAD did 2 things. Firstly, he sent Elrond and his forces to aid those in Eregion as best they could, while also calling in that favour he had asked for from the Númenóreans. Now was the time he needed their assistance. This did not all quite go to plan though, as Elrond could not turn the tide and ended up retreating to Imladris with just some survivors. It is in fact here when Elrond officially founded Imladris, also known later as Rivendell. Over the next few years though, Sauron's forces managed to completely sack Eregion and have a large amount of Eriador overrun. That is, until the great fleet of the Númenóreans, sent by Tar Minas landed in Lindon. This force was so great that it completely drove Sauron's army back, and Sauron even surrendered to the Númenóreans. So Sauron was taken back to Númenor as their prisoner, and the lands began to feel a more peaceful period again. With Imladris founded, the elves decided this would be their new stronghold after Eregion's destruction, and GIL-GALAD would also pass on his Ring of Power, Valia, to Elrond, while also naming him as his vice-regent. This indeed was a time of prosperity again for the elves, as GIL-GALAD's power extended all of north, south and east beyond the Anduin in these following years. As we reach the year 3319 now, the destruction of Númenor would come to be. Sauron had worked his way from prisoner to advisor of the king, tainted the minds of many of the Númenóreans, and persuaded them to break the ban of the Valar by trying to assault the Undying Lands. Therefore, due to the fears of the Valar, Ilúvatar stepped in, swallowed up the great Númenórean fleet and drowned the island, of which Sauron was still on. Sauron would somehow manage to survive this though, but he would make no immediate sign of return. However, a small amount of faithful Númenóreans also managed to escape as well, as they got out before the waves had hit, with these being led by Elendil and his two sons, Anarion and Isildur, forming the realms of Arnor in the north and Gondor in the south after they had landed in Lindon. Elendil was cast up by the waves in the land of Lindon, and he was befriended by GIL-GALAD. Thence he passed up the river Lune, and beyond Ered Luin he established his realm, and his people dwelt in many places in Eriador, about the courses of the Lune and the Barren Duin. But his chief city was at Anúminas, beside the water of Lake Nanuniel. At Fornost upon the North Downs also the Númenóreans dwelt, and in Cardolan, and in the hills of Rhudaur, and towers they raised upon Emin Beraid and upon Amon Sul, and there remain many barrows and ruined works in those places, but the towers of Emin Beraid still look towards the sea. So GIL-GALAD and Elendil would form a strong friendship, and this came in very helpful when Sauron did eventually make his return a few years later. Sauron would attack Gondor first, forcing Isildur to flee from Minas Ithil and return north to his brother and father as Sauron took control of it in 3429. The next year, GIL-GALAD and Elendil would come together to form the powerful Last Alliance of Elves and Men, so that they could come together and take down the poison of Sauron once and for all. These great forces of elves and men would come together at Amon Sul and then march to Imladris in 3431 to make their preparations for war. The army would actually camp here for 3 years before setting out for battle, where they would cross over the Misty Mountains and then make their way south. It is even said that the scale of this army was so great that all forces sent by Sauron to disrupt them on their way simply hid out of fear. It was here as well that Sauron would order the burning of what was believed to be the Gardens of the Endwives, as I have covered previously on a video about what happened to the Endwives if you would like to check that out. But anyway, the Last Alliance would reach the Dark Lands and be victorious at the Battle of Dagorland, but Sauron would make no appearance himself. So, the forces of good would push on and lay siege to Barad-dûr, where Sauron did sit inside. This siege would go on to last for 7 years, as the fortress of Barad-dûr was completed using the power of the One Ring, therefore unnaturally strong. Also here, at some point during these 7 years, Anarion, the son of Elendil, was slain. Now after these 7 years, Sauron decided enough was enough, and so he finally left his fortress to enter the battlefield himself. Sauron was met by both GIL-GALAD and Elendil, and after an epic battle, both GIL-GALAD and Elendil managed to defeat Sauron. However, they would both pay the ultimate sacrifice, with both of them perishing in the act, with afterwards Isildur coming up to Sauron's fallen body and cutting the One Ring from his finger. Record of this attack was made by Isildur, as Gandalf had read during one of his times in Minas Tirith, but I will only quote a small section of this scroll for you all today. It was hot when I first took it, hot as a gleed, and my hand was scorched, so that I doubt if ever I shall feel free of the pain of it. Yet even as I write it is cooled, and it seemeth to shrink, though it loseth neither its beauty nor its shape. Already the writing upon it, which at first was as clear as red flame, faded, and is now only barely to be read. It is fashioned in an elven script of Eregion, for they have no letters in Mordor for such subtle work. But the language is unknown to me. I deem it to be the tongue of the Blackland, since it is foul and uncouth. What evil it saith, I do not know, but I trace here a copy of it, lest it fade beyond recall. The ring misseth, maybe, the heat of Sauron's hand, which was black and yet burned like fire, and so Gil-galad was destroyed. And maybe were the gold made hot again, the writing would be refreshed. But for my part I will risk no hurt to this thing, of all the works of Sauron the only fair. It is precious to me, though I buy it with great pain. And so, from the heat of Sauron's hand, the last High King of the Noldor would pass on in the year 3441 of the Second Age, just as Middle-earth made its way into its Third Age. GIL-GALAD would be a worthy owner of the title that was never claimed again by another of the Noldor after him. Although his parentage has been a slightly confusing topic, it takes nothing away from one of the most powerful beings of his time. It would surely be great to see some of these feats that he accomplished shown on the screen for the Amazon show. So, to end this off now, it feels fitting to end with Bilbo Baggins' translation of The Fall of GIL-GALAD as sung to us by Samwise Gamgee in The Lord of the Rings. GIL-GALAD was an elven king, of him the harpers sadly sing, the last whose realm was fair and free, between the mountains and the sea. His sword was long, his lance was keen, his shining helm afar was seen. The countless stars of heaven's field were mirrored in his silver shield. But long ago he rode away, and where he dwelleth none can say, for into darkness fell his star, in Mordor where the shadows are.
In the histories of Middle-earth, few names bear the weight of such profound continuity and mystique as that of Glorfindel. Known for his luminous presence and valorous deeds, Glorfindel's story is not just one of might, but also a fascinating study of narrative evolution within Tolkien's legendarium. From his noble birth in the undying lands of Valinor, to his legendary duel with a Balrog that would seal his fate, and on to his miraculous return to Middle-earth to aid in the struggles against darkness, Glorfindel's character arcs across the ages are as rich and varied as any other. So sit back and relax as we unravel the threads of his immortal story, exploring not only the battles fought in the physical world, but also the enduring stamp of a hero whose life bridges the gap between myth and history. Let us begin. In the timeless light of the trees of Valinor, where the earliest tales of Middle-earth take root, Glorfindel was born among the High Elves, the Calaquendi. His journey begins in splendour and grace, in lands untouched by shadows that would later darken the world. Glorfindel was tall and powerfully built, a figure of ancient nobility with hair as golden as the light of Lorelin itself. His visage combined the fiercelessness of youth with the serenity of the wise, making him a paragon among his people. While not much is known for certain about his family lineage, it is speculated that Glorfindel might have been kin to Turgon, king of Gondolin, or even a descendant of Finwë's royal line through indirect ties to the House of Finarfin. These connections highlight his prominence among the Noldor, marked by his golden locks, a rare trait signifying his possible descent from the Vanyar through his forebears. Consider this description of him from the Fellowship of the Ring. Glorfindel was tall and straight. His hair was of shining gold, his face fair and young and fearless and full of joy. His eyes were bright and keen, and his voice like music. On his brow sat wisdom, and in his hand was strength. This clear portrayal underscores the celestial nature of Glorfindel's presence, embodying an almost angelic ideal that is echoed throughout his actions and deeds in Tolkien's legendarium. Despite his noble status and the privileges it brought, Glorfindel's heart remained unmarred by the shadows of pride or ambition. His spirit was as pure as his visage, setting him apart even among the high-born elves. When the Noldor, driven by fury and revenge, committed the grievous deed at Aquilonde, Glorfindel alone stood aside, his hands unstained by the blood of his kin. This pivotal moment was a testament to his enduring honour and compassion, traits that would define his legend. As we follow Glorfindel from the serene shores of Valinor to the hidden city of Gondolin, his journey takes a heroic turn. Here, amidst the looming threat of Morgoth's forces, Glorfindel's true character would shine brightest. Encircled by unscalable mountains and shrouded in enchantment, Gondolin stood as a beacon of hope in an age overshadowed by war. Within this sanctuary, Glorfindel held not only a high station but also the hearts of its people. His leadership and valour was soon to be tested in the fires of conflict though. The ill-fated day arrived when Morgoth's legions besieged the hidden city. As chaos engulfed the streets of Gondolin, Glorfindel's command was crucial in organising the city's defence, rallying the elves to stand firm and against their foes. As the version of the fall of Gondolin from the Book of Lost Tales says, The Great Market became deadly in the heat of battle, and it was here that Glorfindel's bravery shone at one of its most brightest. Amidst the clash of swords and the cries of the fallen, he stood resolute, a pillar of light against the darkness. If we again go back to the texts, this time with Tolkien's own words from the Silmarillion. Many are the songs that have been sung of the duel of Glorfindel with the Balrog upon a pinnacle of rock in that high place, and both fell to ruin in the abyss. This moment of supreme bravery is reminiscent of Gandalf's encounter with the Balrog in the Fellowship of the Ring, highlighting perhaps a recurring motif of heroic self-sacrifice central to Tolkien's epic narratives. But back to Glorfindel. Tragedy struck when that fearsome Balrog, a demon of the ancient world, confronted the fleeing elves. It was then that Glorfindel made his ultimate stand. Destiny called him to face this terror alone on a narrow mountain pass. Clashing atop the craggy peaks, Glorfindel and the Balrog fought with a ferocity that echoed throughout the ages. In a final, desperate effort to protect his people, Glorfindel drove the demon back, sacrificing himself to ensure the Balrog's defeat. Glorfindel's fall was not in vain. His sacrifice allowed Tuor, Idril, and the future hope of the elves, Eärendil, to escape, setting the stage for future victories against the darkness. His act of selflessness became a legend, celebrated in elven songs throughout all succeeding ages. As the tale of Gondolin's fall concludes, we see Glorfindel not just as a warrior, but as a beacon of hope and an exemplar of the highest virtues of the Eldar. His legacy, marked by his valour and sacrifice, continued to inspire many a people, even in the darkest of times. In the timeless halls of Mandos, where the spirits of departed elves ponder their earthly deeds, Glorfindel's soul shone brightly, again a testament to that valour and selflessness. The Valar recognised his noble sacrifice, and his spirit was granted a rare honour. Manwë, the king of the Valar, decreed Glorfindel be rebodied, with him also later to return to Middle-earth, not merely as a reborn elf, but as a being of heightened power and purpose. And his mission? To aid the free peoples in their continuing struggles against the rising shadows. And it must also be noted here that while he was in these halls, Glorfindel did become a follower of a certain Elorin, aka Gandalf. Now, arriving back to Middle-earth, sometime between the years 1200 and 1600 of the Second Age, during the tumultuous years following the forging of the One Ring and the rise of Sauron, Glorfindel was a beacon of hope and a bulwark against despair, aiding GIL-GALAD and ELROND in their struggle. His presence fortified the resolve of elves and men alike. To better grasp the full extent of Glorfindel's transformation and return, consider this from Tolkien's The Peoples of Middle-earth book. We can therefore reasonably suppose that Glorfindel, after the purging for forgiveness of his part in the rebellion of the Noldor, was released from Mandos and became himself again, but remained in the Blessed Realm. For Gondolin was destroyed, and all or most of his kin had perished. We can thus understand why he seemed so powerful a figure and almost angelic, for he had returned to the primitive innocence of the firstborn, and had then lived among those elves who had never rebelled, and in the companionship of the Maiar for ages, from the last years of the First Age through the Second Age to the end of the first millennium of the Third Age before he returned to Middle-earth. This shows his role and how he would have been a formidable ally of Elrond, but also underscores his near-divine status, aligning him with the powerful spirits of the Maiar. With wisdom deepened by his stopover in the halls of Mandos and power that rivaled the Maiar, Glorfindel took on roles that shaped the course of Middle-earth's history. His strategic insight and formidable prowess were pivotal in many battles and councils. Perhaps most famously, during the War of the Ring, it was Glorfindel who foresaw the perils of the path that lay before the Fellowship. His counsel at the Council of Elrond was instrumental in shaping the crucial decisions that would lead to Sauron's defeat. Glorfindel's prophetic words, born of the machinations of evil and the strengths of the good, steered the course of war in subtle yet profound ways. His vision extended beyond the immediate, contemplating the long arcs of destiny. We must also note here that Glorfindel had been wanted to be put in the Fellowship of the Ring, However, his presence was almost too bright and it would have become a hindrance to that hidden journey, and so he left the task to the other 9. And this turned out to be a good decision, as in the end they succeeded. And in the aftermath of the war, as peace returned to Middle-earth and the age of the elves began to wane, Glorfindel's legacy as a protector of the realm and a guide to its peoples remained undiminished. His deeds became the stuff of legend, influencing generations long after his time. As we reflect upon Glorfindel's life and deeds, it becomes evident that his story is not just one of heroic actions and mystical rebirths, but also a profound narrative intertwined with the core themes of J.R.R. Tolkien's works. Glorfindel's character is a vessel for exploring the concepts of sacrifice and redemption. His willingness to face a Balrog alone, ensuring the safety of his people, exemplifies the ultimate sacrifice, mirroring the sacrifices seen throughout Tolkien's stories, from Frodo's burden to Aragorn's trials. Furthermore, his return from the halls of Mandos, enhanced and empowered, speaks to the theme of redemption and renewal that pervades Tolkien's mythology. Glorfindel's rebirth is a testament to the idea that from great loss can come greater gain, a notion that resonates deeply with the cyclic nature of hope and despair in Middle-earth. Leadership, another pivotal theme in Tolkien's epic works, is embodied by Glorfindel through his roles as a military leader and a wise counsellor. His guidance, based on foresight and wisdom, helped shape the strategies that led to crucial victories in the battles against darkness. His ability to inspire courage in others, to lead from the front and to offer wisdom in times of need are qualities that make Glorfindel a quintessential Tolkien hero. These characteristics are not only pivotal to the plot lines of the tales, but also offer rich insights into the values that Tolkien cherished. Glorfindel's story also prompts us to reflect on the nature of power and its use in Middle-earth. Unlike many characters who are corrupted by power, Glorfindel uses his enhanced abilities to serve and protect others. This altruism aligns with Tolkien's moral framework, where true power is shown through humility and service. As we consider Glorfindel's legacy, we see it as a mirror reflecting the enduring themes of Tolkien's works. Themes of sacrifice, leadership, and moral integrity. These are not only woven into the fabric of his narratives, but also serve as guiding principles for the characters within and the readers beyond the pages. And so there we have it. As our journey through the life and times of Glorfindel comes to a close, we reflect on the profound legacy of this legendary elf whose existence spans the breadth of Middle-earth's history. From his valiant stand in Gondolin to his wise guidance in the Second and Third Ages, Glorfindel's actions have been a beacon of courage, wisdom, and integrity. His life serves as a testament to the power of redemption and the nature of hope amidst the darkest times. Glorfindel reminds us that true heroism is timeless, and that great deeds echo through the ages, inspiring generation after generation. Whether facing down a fearsome Balrog or guiding the councils of leaders, his legacy is characterized by a selfless service and a profound commitment to the greater good. Only 4 characters in all of Tolkien's Legendarium ever returned from the halls of Mandos. Gandalf, Beren and Luthien, the other was Glorfindel. An elf so powerful that the Nazgul fled from him in terror. An elf who killed a Balrog with his bare hands. And an elf that Peter Jackson completely removed from the story. Long before the ring, before Sauron forged even the first whispers of his power, there stood a hidden city of light. Gondolin. I covered this in a recent video, so please go and check that out if you want to know more about Gondolin. But among its greatest defenders was Glorfindel, Lord of the House of the Golden Flower. When Morgoth's armies finally found the city, Gondolin didn't fall quietly. Balrog stormed the walls, dragons tore through the streets, and the sky itself turned to fire. In the chaos, Glorfindel did what he always did. He ran towards the danger. He fought through flames and shadow to protect the survivors escaping into the mountains. But one Balrog followed them. On a narrow cliffside pass, high above the ravine of Cirith Thorenath, Glorfindel faced the demon alone. No armour of Gondolin could have withstood such a foe, But Glorfindel didn't hesitate. Elf Lord against Fire Demon, Light against Shadow. Their duel was brutal. Tolkien writes that Glorfindel's golden hair shone like a torch against the Balrog's darkness. Neither yielded, and in the end, Glorfindel struck the killing blow. But victory came at a cost. With its last strength, the Balrog dragged him from the cliff, and both fell into the abyss below. His sacrifice saved the line of Eärendil, the same line that would one day bring Sauron to ruin. But Glorfindel's story didn't end at the bottom of that ravine, because death, for him, was only the beginning. When Glorfindel fell into the abyss, his body died, but his spirit did not fade. It passed to the halls of Mandos, as all elves do. But unlike most, he did not remain there for long. The Valar judged Glorfindel's sacrifice at Gondolin not simply brave, but world-shaping. By saving the line of Eärendil, he ensured the path to Morgoth's eventual downfall. And so, in a decision made only twice in all of Tolkien's Legendarium, they gave him back his life. Glorfindel was re-embodied in Valinor, but not merely restored. The Valar returned him purified, strengthened, and filled with a radiant spiritual power that set him apart from nearly every other elf in Middle-earth. When he walked again, Glorfindel was no longer just the lord of a fallen house. He was a being of light, a presence that could be felt as much as it could be seen. And Middle-earth would need that light, for in the Second Age, new shadows were rising. Sauron was gathering power, the Nazgul had emerged, 9 ancient kings twisted into deathless servants. And so, Glorfindel returned across the sea. Not in secret, not in exile, but as a shining bulwark against a darkness that the world did not yet understand. It was during this age that Glorfindel made one of the most important prophecies in Tolkien's entire mythology, a prophecy about the Witch King of Angmar, and the doom that would one day find him. Centuries passed. The Second Age fell into darkness, kingdoms rose and crumbled, the Third Age rose, and in the cold northern wastes, a new terror emerged. The Witch King of Angmar. His armies devastated Arnor, cities burned, royal lines failed. The last High King of the North died beneath its shadow. But when the Witch King reached the final stronghold of the Dunedain, Glorfindel rode with the Elves of Rivendell to meet him. Their clash was not a duel of blades, but a collision of powers. The Witch King, greatest of the Nazgul, had broken kingdoms. Yet, when he faced Glorfindel, he did something he almost never did. He fled. Tolkien describes Glorfindel in this age as radiant, a being whose spiritual light shone so fiercely that no ringwraith could endure it. His very presence burned them like sunlight breaking through a storm. As the Witch King vanished into the shadows, the men of Arnor urged Glorfindel to pursue him and end this terror forever. But Glorfindel refused. And here, on the battlefield of Fornost, he spoke the words that would echo across 1,000 years. Far off yet is his doom, and not by the hand of man will he fall. A prophecy that would shape the fate of the War of the Ring, and one that the Witch King himself would come to believe. When he later mocked Theoden King with the cry, "No living man may hinder me," he was repeating Glorfindel, and he was repeating it wrong. When the War of the Ring finally had begun, Glorfindel was no distant legend. He was in Rivendell, one of Elrond's most trusted captains, and one of the first to learn that Frodo carried the One Ring. And when the Nazgul rode out to hunt the hobbits, Glorfindel didn't hesitate. He went straight onto the road, searching for them with the speed that few elves could match. In the book, he is the one who finds Aragorn and the hobbits. He is the one who gives Frodo his horse, and he is the one who stands between the ring-bearer and the Nine. But here's the part most viewers never knew. Frodo sees Glorfindel as a figure of white fire. When Frodo begins to slip into the Wraith world, Glorfindel appears not as an elf, but as a blazing, radiant being, one whose spiritual presence shines brighter than the shadows of the Nine combined. Tolkien writes that the Nazgul wavered when Glorfindel advanced. Wavered. The Ringwraiths, creatures who shrug off armies, fell back in fear of him. This is why he places Frodo on Asphaleth and sends the horse racing ahead, because Glorfindel's power buys just enough time for the Ringbearer to reach the Bruinen. And when the 9 attempt to cross the river, it is Glorfindel who advances on them like a burning star, driving them into the flood that destroys their horses and sends their spirits shrieking back to Mordor. In the movies, this moment is given to Arwen, and while the scene is iconic on its own, Tolkien intended something very different. Frodo was meant to be saved by one of the most powerful elves left in Middle-earth, a Balrog slayer, one reborn, one whose light alone could turn the Nazgul away. Leaving him out didn't just remove a character, it removed one of the last echoes of the First Age still walking in the Third. So, why was Glorfindel erased from the films? The simplest reason is also the most practical. Peter Jackson needed to streamline the story. The early part of the Fellowship of the Ring already introduces dozens of characters. Frodo, Gandalf, Bilbo, Sam, Saruman, Nazgul, Aragorn, Elrond, Arwen, and for mainstream audiences, adding another elf lord with a dense First Age backstory kind of just risked overwhelming the pace. And Arwen, who has relatively little page time in the books, needed a stronger emotional presence in the film. Giving her Glorfindel's role was a way to foreground her connection to Aragorn and the fate of the world. From a filmmaking perspective, it does make sense, but from a lore perspective, it really meant something was lost. Glorfindel isn't just another elf. He's not Legolas or Haldir or one of the nameless guards of Rivendell. He is one of the last living memories of that First Age, a warrior who fought in a city of light before Numenor was even founded, a Balrog slayer reborn, a beacon of the ancient power that is fading from Middle-earth. His presence in the narrative is a reminder that the War of the Ring is not an isolated conflict. It is the final act in a drama that began thousands and thousands of years earlier, in the days when God still openly walked in the world. When Glorfindel strides onto the page, Tolkien is showing us that Middle-earth once was brighter, deeper, and so much closer to the divine. But then you take that away, and that connection weakens. You lose the sense that Frodo is not just being helped by friends, he is being carried by the last surviving threads of an age long gone. And that is really why Glorfindel matters. Not just because he killed a Balrog, not just because he returned from the halls of Mandos, but because he is one of the few characters who truly bridges the ages, a living echo of the world before the world. And in Tolkien's Middle-earth, echoes have power. And so, there we have it. Glorfindel's story stretches from the glory of Gondolin to the final years of the Third Age, a lifespan no other character truly matches. He died saving the ancestors of heroes, he returned to guide their descendants, and when the shadows rose again, he stood as one of the last reminders of the world before the world, the age of gods and fire, and of course Balrogs. Even if the movies erased him, well, Tolkien never did, and in the pages of Middle-earth, Glorfindel's light never faded, not in life, not in death, and not in the memories of the readers.
Galadriel's character has been one of great contention in recent months, with her appearance in the Rings of Power show drawing a number of criticisms. Not so much for the actress Morvith Clark, but rather for the characterization of Galadriel. What we will consider are the criticisms, look at what the text has to say, and what we might make of publications that give us information that could change how we understand earlier events. As with Tolkien's tendency to revise, we do have two versions in particular of Galadriel's actions at Alqualondë, the actions at the first kinslaying as published in the Silmarillion. Today we will see Tolkien's First Lady, the Lady of Light, the very light of Eru before us. Now, the most vocalized critique was that Galadriel wasn't Xena the warrior princess, and that by putting her in plate armor and strapping a broadsword to her back, somehow this was a slight to the character as constituted by Professor Tolkien. To be completely honest, upon his death, Tolkien appeared to be uncertain where Galadriel's place was to be, or where it might have been had he had one more day to edit and change and evolve his continuously growing and ever-expanding legendarium. Christopher Tolkien has proven himself tireless in his continued efforts to bring more of his father's work to light, even in rough and unfinished form. I mean, just look at the beginning of the history of Galadriel and Celeborn in the Unfinished Tales, as he begins with,
There is no part of the history of Middle-earth more full of problems than of the story of Galadriel and Celeborn, and it must be admitted that there are severe inconsistencies embedded in the traditions. Or, to look at the matter from another point of view, that the role and importance of Galadriel only emerged slowly, and that her story underwent continual refashionings. Putting together a consistent story for Galadriel is tricky, as here we have something like Schrodinger's canon, that is, depending on whether or not you've observed it, it both is and isn't canon. Later publications that came about in the years after Professor Tolkien's death have done much to fill those gaps, but at what stage of completion they were in we can only guess, and to what extent it contradicts earlier publications is a real issue. If we go and look at one of Tolkien's letters dated March 6, 1973, he begins by explaining Galadriel's name. Galadriel, like all the other names of elvish persons in The Lord of the Rings, is an invention of my own. It is in Sindarin form, see appendices E and F, and means maiden crowned with gleaming hair. It is secondary name given to her in her youth in the far past, because she had long hair which glistened like gold and was also shot with silver. She was then of Amazon disposition and bound up her hair as a crown when taking part in athletic feats. Tolkien has always used the most flattering of terms in his descriptions. More than once Tolkien refers to Galadriel as the most valiant and strong. Galadriel was part of the House of Finwë, with her parents being Finarfin and Eowyn, so really being from a mighty bloodline. And of being the greatest of the household of Finarfin, it is not difficult to understand why she would prove to still be important even at the end of the Third Age. Galadriel does wear her age well, and if you are curious, she is actually over 8,000 years old by the time she leaves Middle-earth after the War of the Ring. She also had the benefit of living during the time of the trees, being Calaquendi, which gives her an advantage over her kin who remained in Middle-earth as well and never made that great journey to a man. So although over 8,000 years old, she is still one of the most graceful to be in Middle-earth. Talking of which, another aspect of her great power comes from the time she spent living in the light of the Two Trees of Valinor. She was born during the years of the trees, an age before the first which comprised of many migrations and chiefly that of the sundering of the elves from the original clans of 3 who awoke in Cuiviénen. Of those, 2 groups would make it all the way to Valinor, while the Teleri, sundered twice as it moved onward, would make it only with their number greatly diminished. This is why the kinslaying which took place in the wake of Feanor's wrath and fiery heart that, once it was ablaze, few could change his course by reason and none by force. Galadriel's story is more spotty than that of Feanor's though, and we have bits and pieces here and there which add up to a confusing image. In some accountancy, Tolkien describes her as having Amazon disposition, as we said earlier, but it is her observation of the kingslaying of Aquilonde and the lessons learned from Feanor's many, often spectacular failures that play a bigger part in her character. It is important to note that in Middle-earth, possession is a dangerous thing, and to take hold of something priceless and to say, "This is mine, I own it," betrays an ignorance of this world, a living world. Feanor was led astray by thinking that he could possess that light which gave the Silmarils their unrivaled brilliance and beauty. That light was of the trees, of the creation of Eru Ilúvatar, and its origin is in the song that wove into being the world and all things. To claim possession of the Silmarils, or even yet the ring, is to think that power is the same as strength. The strength of arms is always a last resort, and Galadriel was wise enough to understand this. A big thing. From the flight of the Noldor, this takes place after the rebellion against the Valar that Galadriel very much took part in, despite there being no love lost between the two. But Finarfin spoke softly, as was his wont, and sought to calm the Noldor, persuading them to pause and ponder ere deeds were done that could not be undone, and Orodreth, alone of his sons, spoke in like manner. Finrod was with Turgon, his friend, but Galadriel, the only woman of the Noldor to stand that day, tall and valiant among the contending princes, was eager to be gone. No oath she swore, but the words of Feanor concerning Middle-earth had kindled in her heart,
for she yearned to see the wide unguarded lands and to rule there a realm of her own will. Though the implication is there, the published The Silmarillion implies what Christopher Tolkien notes later, that being his suggestion that Galadriel may have aided Elwing's escape to the haven of Sirion with the Silmaril, yet she would be present at the ruin of Doriath. It is said in the Unfinished Tales, Galadriel and Celeborn participated in the fight for Eregion prior to its fall, and in their company was a great host to command. In the end though, Eregion was sacked, and this terrible conflict marked the beginning of the War of the Elves and Sauron, beginning in 1693 of the Second Age. Refugees like Galadriel and Celeborn found refuge first in Lindon, then Lothlorien, a garden kingdom of her own to rule, something she had wished for so long and something she could now try. But what is important here, mind, is that Galadriel and Celeborn led the defence of Eregion, and we have no reason to doubt Galadriel's presence, nor Celeborn's, on the field of battle. An interesting note on Galadriel's age comes from a letter to his friend, Naomi Mitchison, who was at the time proofreading the first 2 volumes of The Lord of the Rings, and this comes in response to a number of questions that she had about the book. Galadriel is as old or older than Shelob. She is the last remaining of the great among the High Elves and awoke in Eldamar beyond the sea, long before Ungoliant came to Middle-earth and produced her broods there. Another interesting note comes with Galadriel's hair and her most famous relation, her uncle Feanor, whom she deeply despised. He had asked for a strand of her hair thrice, and thrice he was denied, as Galadriel's hair was said to shine with the light of the 2 trees of Valinor, and Feanor wanted that. Yet of course Gimli, the dwarf, son of Gloin, asked once and was given 3 during the Lord of the Rings. The Silmarils are burned with the light of the 2 trees and became famous for their beauty, the beauty that caused the wars and kin strife which followed in wake of their creation, and the ensuing War of the Jewels, which was a great turning point for the Elven race as a whole. The same beauty that could apparently come from the hair that sat on Galadriel's head. So that is to say, if Galadriel was so inclined, she could cause many a more war just by her beauty. Galadriel remained an important figure throughout her time, and she played an important role in the War of the Ring, calling the White Council for example, and it was her that wanted to put Gandalf as its head, even though he would refuse, which is what saw Saruman take up that role. She would also lead her warriors into Mirkwood, and, with the help of Nenya, the Elven Ring of Power on her finger, she utterly razes Dol Guldur, ending the blight of shadow that had long infected the once great home of Greenwood the Great. If we step back for a moment here though at the end, in her youth, Galadriel was an ambitious firebrand, realistically an expected trait with her blood being that the same of Feanor's, if only by his youngest brother. She would seek her own realm to rule over, but her meeting with Melian would do much to change her, and that being for the better. There is nothing to suggest that she wouldn't be wielding a sword and engaged in battle, but there is little to actually show that. In one version of the Kinslaying, she is not present, but in another, she takes up arms to defend her mother's kin. Either way, with her being 6'4" tall and the mightiest elf to live in Arda since Feanor himself, according to Tolkien's own words, this set her apart as a massively powerful and wise character who deserves, and often demands, respect. What is most important in understanding her is to know that power is always somewhat of an illusion. It is borrowed, but strength is one's own. Her greatest feat of strength is the rejection of the One Ring, as she has the strength of character to resist that kind of temporary, artificial power, but true temptation it is. So let's finish off with a quick quote from The Lord of the Rings of this event. "And now at last it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of a dark lord, you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night, fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair." She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illuminated her alone and left all else dark.
She stood before Frodo, seemingly now tall beyond measurement, and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again, and lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. "I passed the test," she said. "I will diminish and go into the west, and remain Galadriel."
So there we have it. The Lady Galadriel is no Xena warrior princess, but there is no reason to think that she would be unable to act in such a fashion if the needs arose. She has the strength of character to not rely on violence, however, and is wise enough to know that all-important difference, the difference between the strength of character and the temporary power conferred by the magic of the Rings of Power. All in all, Galadriel is a wondrous, beautiful being who was known as the mightiest, fairest, and greatest for good reason. She was never one to take all power herself, but she did wish to rule. She understood the beauty in the world and wanted to make sure that she could keep it the way it was. This is why Lothlorien was so important to her. It gave her her greatest wish. Really beyond that, she cared for little more, and this really shows us why Galadriel was one of the most powerful and greatest, yet fairest and most elegant beings to ever exist in Tolkien's world.
Galadriel was born in the bliss of Valinor, but it was not long in the reckoning of the Blessed Realm before that was dimmed, and thereafter she had no peace within. For in that testing time amid the strife of the Noldor, she was drawn this way and that. She was proud, strong, and self-willed, as were all descendants of Finwë save Finarfin, and like her brother Finrod, of all her kin the nearest to her heart, she had dreams of far lands and dominions that might be her own to order as she would without tutelage. Yet deeper still there dwelt in her the noble and generous spirit of the Vanyar, and a reverence for the Valar that she could not forget. From her earliest years she had a marvellous gift of insight into the minds of others, but judged them with mercy and understanding, and she withheld her goodwill from none save only Fëanor.
To understand Galadriel's actions in the Second Age, I think it would be a good idea to look briefly at her origins and character development during the earlier ages. Galadriel, as just said in that quote, was born in Valinor, the blessed realm of the Valar, as one of the Noldor, the most skilled and learned of the elven kindreds. She was the daughter of Finarfin and the granddaughter of Finwë, making her one of the most noble and high-ranking elves of all of Tolkien's Legendarium. Known for her beauty, wisdom, and ambition, Galadriel was a natural leader with a keen mind and a deep sense of justice. In the First Age, Galadriel joined the rebellion of the Noldor against Morgoth, leaving the safety of Valinor to journey to Middle-earth. Despite her decision to leave, Galadriel did not participate in the kinslaying at Aqualonde, distancing herself from the more violent aspects of her kin's rebellion. She settled in Beleriand, where she lived in Doriath and learned from Melian the Mire. Her time in Doriath honed her wisdom and deepened her understanding of the world and its perils. Galadriel married Celeborn, a Sindarin elf of Doriath, and together they sought to build peaceful and prosperous realms amidst the turmoil of Middle-earth. By the end of the First Age, with the defeat of Morgoth and the drowning of Beleriand, Galadriel refused the summons of the Valar to return to Valinor. She chose to remain in Middle-earth, motivated by a desire to rule a realm of her own, to continue opposing the remnants of Morgoth's evil, and perhaps by a sense of exile for her part in the rebellion. These motivations, rooted in both ambition and a commitment to resist evil, shaped her actions throughout the Second Age. Also, before diving in deeply, it is worth acknowledging that Tolkien's portrayal of Galadriel did evolve, with different versions of her actions and motivations present in his various texts. This video today will combine ideas from several of the important books, like of course the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, and the History of Middle-earth. Tolkien's Legendarium invites multiple readings, and the complexities in Galadriel's character highlight the richness of his world building. But with that groundwork now laid, let us see what we can put together about Galadriel in the Second Age. The Second Age was a time of great rebuilding and the rise of new powers. Galadriel's actions during this period were crucial in shaping the future of Middle-earth.
At the beginning of the Second Age, Galadriel and Celeborn initially resided in Lindon, the realm established by GIL-GALAD on the western shores of Middle-earth. However, in 750 of the Second Age, they moved eastward to Eregion, also known as Hollin. Eregion was a Noldorin realm located near the western gate of Khazad-dûm or Moria, and was known for its skilled elven smiths. Galadriel and Celeborn played key roles in Eregion, and Galadriel's wisdom helped guide the realm's development and its interactions with other peoples, including the dwarves of Khazad-dûm, with whom Eregion had strong trade relations. It is important to note that Tolkien provided multiple accounts of Galadriel and Celeborn's involvement in Eregion. In some versions they were central figures in the realm's establishment, while in others their role was more peripheral, or they had left Eregion before Sauron's arrival. Of course, the exact details of their stay in Eregion and subsequent move to Lothlorien are open to interpretation, reflecting Tolkien's evolving thoughts on these characters. But saying that, by the time it reached around the year 1200 of the Second Age, Sauron, now disguised as Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, arrived in Eregion. He presented himself as a benevolent emissary of the Valar, offering to share his vast knowledge of craftsmanship and power. Celebrimbor, the leader of the elven smiths known as the Gwaith-i-Mírdain, was captivated by Annatar's knowledge, and under his guidance, the elves of Eregion began to forge the Rings of Power. Galadriel, however, was not deceived by Sauron's fair appearance. Her wisdom and insight led her to mistrust Annatar, sensing the shadow behind his gifts. According to the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales, she advised Celebrimbor and the other elves to reject Annatar's teachings and maintain their vigilance. Despite her warnings, Celebrimbor and the Gwaith-i-Mírdain continued their collaboration with Annatar, a decision that would of course have far-reaching consequences. Going forward around 300 years now, the Rings of Power were forged. Celebrimbor then created the 3 rings for the elves, Narya, Nenya and Vilya, without Sauron's direct involvement this time, making them free of his corruption. Celebrimbor entrusted Nenya, the Ring of Water, to Galadriel, recognizing her wisdom, strength, and ability to protect it from the dark influences of Sauron. Nenya's power was one of preservation and protection, and Galadriel used it to enhance and shield her realm. Galadriel's foresight in hiding the 3 rings ensured they remained beyond Sauron's grasp, a critical factor in preserving the elven realm's independence. The connection between Galadriel and Celebrimbor was complex, marked by a mutual respect and perhaps even admiration. Celebrimbor's decision to give Nenya to Galadriel indicated his trust in her leadership and her role as a guardian of elven wisdom. Some interpretations, as discussed in the Unfinished Tales, suggest Celebrimbor harboured unspoken affection for Galadriel, adding a personal layer to their relationship. This dynamic highlights Galadriel's influence and the respect she commanded amongst the elves of Eregion. As tensions in Eregion grew, Galadriel and Celeborn moved to Lothlorien, a forested region east of the Misty Mountains. Although the exact date of their settlement in Lothlorien is not explicitly stated, it likely occurred around 1697 of the Second Age, after the fall of Eregion. While this video suggests this timeline, Tolkien did not provide a definitive date for Galadriel's establishment in Lothlorien. Some texts imply that Galadriel might have moved there earlier, possibly due to rising tensions in Eregion, or personal reasons related to her desire for a realm of her own. In Lothlorien, Galadriel established herself as the Lady of the Wood, using Nenya's power to preserve its beauty and to protect it from Sauron's growing influence. Lothlorien, under her guidance, became a land of peace, renowned for its golden malorn trees and timeless tranquility. Galadriel's efforts to create a sanctuary in Lothlorien reflected her commitment to preserving elven culture and knowledge amidst growing darkness. But time went on, and between 1693 and 1701 of the Second Age, the War of the Elves and Sauron unfolded. Sauron had launched that assault on Eregion in 1697, leading to its destruction. Celebrimbor was captured, tortured, and killed by Sauron, who sought to gain control of those 3 elven rings. Galadriel's earlier decision to leave Eregion and take Nenya with her ensured that it, along with the other 2 elven rings, remained hidden and safe from Sauron's grasp. During this war, Galadriel played a vital role in organising resistance against Sauron's forces. She provided refuge for the fleeing elves of Eregion in Lothlorien, and assisted in coordinating efforts with other elven realms and Númenórean allies too. Her foresight and strategic counsel were crucial in maintaining the morale and unity of the elves. Galadriel's wisdom extended to forging alliances with the Númenóreans, the men who had aided the elves against Sauron. These alliances were vital during the War of the Elves and Sauron. The arrival of a great Númenórean fleet in the year 1700 helped turn the tide, driving Sauron's forces out of Eriador and back to Mordor. Although alliances between elves and Númenor are well documented, specific references to Galadriel's direct involvement in these diplomatic efforts are not explicitly detailed in Tolkien's works. Her role in fostering these alliances is inferred from her broader influence and status among the elves. But nonetheless, the collaboration laid the foundation for future alliances between elves and the kingdoms of men. Galadriel's diplomacy with Númenor was pivotal in shaping the broader alliances that would later play a role in the Last Alliance. Throughout the Second Age, Galadriel maintained strong ties with other elven leaders. She supported GIL-GALAD, the High King of the Noldor in Lindon, and Elrond, who established Rivendell as a refuge for elves and other free peoples. Galadriel's influence helped to foster unity among the elves, promoting cooperation and mutual defense against the growing threat of Sauron. Her wisdom and leadership were instrumental in ensuring that key strategic locations like Rivendell remained safe havens. But then we move forward again, as we reach the year 3319 of the Second Age, when the island kingdom of Númenor was destroyed due to Sauron's manipulation of its last king, Ar-Pharazôn. The downfall of Númenor led to significant changes in the political landscape of Middle-earth. After Númenor's destruction, Sauron returned to Mordor and his influence began to grow once more. Galadriel's vigilance and preparations during these years helped to safeguard Lothlorien and other elven realms from immediate threat, maintaining their independence and security. And so then, just over 100 years later in 3430, in response to Sauron's increasing power, Galadriel supported the formation of the last alliance of elves and men. Although she did not directly participate in the battle, her guidance and support for the alliance's leaders, GIL-GALAD and Elendil, were crucial in the coalition's efforts to confront Sauron. While Galadriel's support for the last alliance was crucial, her involvement was more indirect. She provided counsel and wisdom from Lothlorien rather than directly engaging in the military planning or battle. Her support was vital in maintaining morale and unity among the elves and their allies, but she did not participate in the actual conflict. The alliance culminated in the Battle of Dagorlad in 3434 and the subsequent 7-year siege of Barad-dûr, which ended in Sauron's defeat in 3441. The defeat of Sauron marked the end of the Second Age, but Galadriel knew that the lingering presence of the One Ring would continue to pose a threat in the ages to come. The Second Age laid the foundation for the events that would unfold in the Third. Galadriel's actions during this time, her mistrust of Sauron, the protection of the Elven Rings, the establishment of Lothlorien, and her alliances with other Elven leaders and the Númenóreans helped shape the resistance against Sauron's influence. Her foresight ensured that the 3 rings of the elves remained free from Sauron's corruption, allowing the elves to continue their guardianship over Middle-earth's beauty and knowledge. The war against Sauron and the establishment of the Last Alliance set the stage for the conflicts of the Third Age, including the War of the Ring. Galadriel's continued vigilance and leadership in Lothlorien made her a key figure in the struggle against Sauron's resurgence, ultimately contributing to his final defeat at the end of the Third Age. And again at the end here I will mention, as with much of Tolkien's legendarium, different versions and interpretations of Galadriel's actions exist, reflecting Tolkien's evolving thoughts on her character. The complexities and variations in Galadriel's story only add to the richness and depth of Middle-earth's history. And so there we have it. Galadriel's role during the Second Age was marked by wisdom, foresight, and the unwavering commitment to the preservation of Middle-earth. Her leadership in Eregion, the establishment of Lothlorien, her interactions with Sauron and her alliances with the elves and men all demonstrate her importance in the fight against darkness. Through her actions, Galadriel not only safeguarded her people, but also laid the groundwork for the eventual defeat of Sauron. Her legacy was as a guardian, leader, and a symbol of hope that continued to resonate throughout the Third Age as well, reminding all of those who encountered her of the power of wisdom and light. In Eregion, the craftsman of the Gwaith Myrddin, the people of the jewelsmiths, surpassed in cunning all that have ever wrought, save only FEANOR himself. And indeed, greatest in skill among them was Celebrimbor, son of Carúfin, who was estranged from his father and remained in Nargothrond when Celegorm and Carúfin were driven forth, as is told in the Quenta Silmarillion. Celebrimbor, whose name means Silver Fist in Sindarin, was born in Aman during the Years of the Trees, before the year 1495. He was the son of Carúfin, one of the 7 sons of FEANOR, the most gifted craftsman among the elves. Celebrimbor's mother, whose name remains unknown, stayed behind in Aman when the Noldor were exiled. Celebrimbor inherited his family's extraordinary skill in craftsmanship, but notably lacked the dark temperament often associated with FEANOR and his sons. After the darkening of Valinor by Morgoth and the theft of the Silmarils, Celebrimbor followed his father and grandfather into exile in Middle-earth. Although he did not swear the Oath of FEANOR, he chose to accompany his king, showing loyalty to his family but distancing himself from their more violent actions. In Beleriand, Celebrimbor initially resided with his father Carúfin and his uncle Celegorm in the realm of Himlad. This region remained under their control until the Dagor Bragorlach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, in the First Age year 455, which forced them to flee southwards to Nargothrond, the hidden kingdom of Finrod Felagund. During this time, Carúfin and Celegorm gained influence in Nargothrond, seeking to control it. Celebrimbor, however, did not participate in his father's and uncle's political schemes against Finrod. He remained loyal to Finrod, showing a sense of justice and honour that contrasted with the manipulations of Carúfin and Celegorm. When Finrod left Nargothrond to aid Beren, Carúfin and Celegorm sought to usurp control of the kingdom. However, their true intentions were now revealed, leading to their exile. Celebrimbor publicly rejected his father's actions and separated himself from Carúfin. He chose to remain in Nargothrond, highlighting his desire to distance himself from his family's more violent and morally questionable decisions. Little is known about Celebrimbor's specific actions during the remainder of the First Age, particularly after his father and uncle's exile. He likely remained in Nargothrond, contributing to its defense and possibly witnessing its fall in 495 of the First Age, when Glaurung the Dragon sacked the city. His activities after this event and until the end of the First Age are largely unrecorded, suggesting perhaps a period of low profile and reflection. So, this is where we do now reach the Second Age, and at the beginning of the Second Age, Celebrimbor joined Galadriel and Celeborn in establishing the realm of Eregion, or Hollin, around the year 750. This region was strategically located near the west gate of Khazad-dûm, or Moria, facilitating trade and cooperation with the dwarves. Celebrimbor became the leader of the Gwaith Myrddin, a guild of master craftsmen and jewelsmiths, renowned throughout Middle-earth for their skills, second only to FEANOR himself. In addition to his prowess as a craftsman, Celebrimbor proved to be an able political leader, maintaining strong relations with those dwarves in Khazad-dûm and the elves in Lindon as well. Under his guidance, Eregion became a prosperous realm, known for its beauty and the mastery of its jewelsmiths. Celebrimbor's ability to foster alliances and lead his people contributed to the success of Eregion before Sauron's dark influence took hold. His ability to navigate these complex alliances was key to Eregion's early prosperity, and his openness to cooperation with the dwarves was a rare and progressive move in an age where tensions between these two races was often ran high. The decision to settle near Khazad-dûm was influenced by the recent discovery of mithril as well, a precious and near indestructible metal found only in these mountains in the lands of Middle-earth. Celebrimbor's love of craft and exploration of new materials likely drove his enthusiasm for this partnership. Celebrimbor developed a deep friendship with Narvi, a master dwarven craftsman. Together they created the Doors of Durin, the western entrance to Khazad-dûm, with Celebrimbor inscribing the famous Ithildin inscription being the starlight reflective material. This collaboration marked one of the rare moments of true cooperation between elves and dwarves, highlighting Celebrimbor's ability to bridge cultural divides. As Celebrimbor's reputation as a master craftsman grew, he attracted the attention of others with more sinister motives. It was during this time now of prosperity that a certain Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, appeared in these lands, claiming to bring wisdom from the Valar themselves. So it is around 1200 of the Second Age, and Sauron, disguised as Annatar, arrives in Eregion. He claimed to be that representative of the Valar, offering to share his knowledge of ringmaking, while GIL-GALAD and Elrond in Lindon had rejected him outright. Celebrimbor, desiring to surpass the craftsmanship of his grandfather Feanor, welcomed Annatar's guidance. Initially, Celebrimbor did have reservations about Annatar, suspecting that something was not quite right about his sudden appearance and vast knowledge. However, Annatar skillfully appealed to Celebrimbor's ambition, particularly his desire to outdo his grandfather Feanor in craftsmanship, which, all in all, eventually led to him embracing Annatar's teaching. Sauron's influence led Celebrimbor and the Gwaith Myrdain to forge the Rings of Power around 1500 of the Second Age. It took 300 years before they reached this point. Celebrimbor himself created the 3 Elven rings later, Vilya, Nenya, and Naya, this time without Sauron's direct involvement, preserving their purity from Sauron's malevolent intent. In addition to the 3 Elven rings, Celebrimbor and his smiths had crafted several lesser rings of power under Sauron's guidance. These lesser rings, while not as powerful as the 3 Elven rings, were nonetheless dangerous tools that could influence their bearers, especially once Sauron had later forged the One Ring. These rings were eventually distributed to men and dwarves, with catastrophic consequences. While Celebrimbor intended them to be powerful artifacts of skill, Sauron's influence corrupted them, allowing him to ensnare their bearers when he forged that One Ring later. These rings were truly powerful artifacts. 100 more years later, that is how long it took for Sauron to forge the One Ring in secret in Mount Doom, where here he intended to control all other rings and their bearers. Celebrimbor, upon sensing Sauron's influence, immediately realised his error in trusting Annatar. After sensing the creation of the One Ring and realising Sauron's betrayal, Celebrimbor acted swiftly. His defiance marked him as a key figure in the opposition to Sauron's tyranny, though ultimately his forces were overwhelmed. He acted quickly to hide the 3 rings, sending Vilya and Naya to GIL-GALAD in Lindon and Nenya to Galadriel in Lothlorien. Celebrimbor's relationship with Galadriel was one of deep respect and perhaps even admiration. Some texts suggest that Celebrimbor may have in fact harboured unspoken affection for her, which might explain why he entrusted her with Nenya, the Ring of Water. This personal connection to Galadriel highlights the complexity of his character and his ability to discern true wisdom and strength in others. This act of defiance against Sauron marked the beginning of open conflict. Celebrimbor's actions demonstrated his bravery and his realization of the great threat Sauron posed to all 3 peoples of Middle-earth. So, in response to Celebrimbor's defiance, Sauron launched a full-scale assault on Eregion in 1693 of the Second Age. Despite the warnings sent to Lindon, GIL-GALAD's reinforcements led by Elrond arrived too late. The forces of Sauron led by orcs and other dark creatures overwhelmed the defences of Eregion. During the sack of Eregion in 1697, Celebrimbor was captured. Under extreme torture, Celebrimbor revealed the locations of the lesser rings, but withstood revealing the hiding places of the 3. Sauron, furious at Celebrimbor's defiance, executed him brutally. His body was shot with arrows and then displayed on a pole as a banner to demoralise the Elven defenders. Celebrimbor's death marked a turning point in the war. Eregion was left in ruins, its population decimated, and the remaining Noldor fled to the other Elven havens. Elrond established the refuge of Imladris, or Rivendell, as a sanctuary for those fleeing Sauron's wrath. Sauron's victory was ultimately limited, as the three rings remained hidden and beyond his immediate grasp, preserving hope among the elves. The three rings crafted by Celebrimbor played such a crucial role throughout the Third Age, aiding in the preservation and protection of those elven realms of Rivendell, Lothlorien, and Mithlond. These rings allowed their bearers to maintain beauty, healing, and the resistance to evil, forming strongholds of light against Sauron's growing power. Celebrimbor's story is often seen as a reflection of the ongoing struggle against the corrupting influence of power and the resilience of those who seek redemption. Despite his initial failure in being deceived by Sauron, his final acts of defiance and his craftsmanship preserved hope for Middle-earth's future. According to one version of the legend, Celebrimbor crafted the second Elisar, a green gem that had power to heal and preserve. However, in another account, the creation of the Elisar is attributed to Enerdil, a Noldorin smith of Gondolin. So, the exact origins of the stone remain uncertain, but Celebrimbor's craftsmanship would certainly have made him capable of creating such a powerful artifact. So although this part of the story can't be putting stone anywhere, I still thought it was worth a mention at the end here. After all, this stone was later given to Galadriel and eventually passed to Aragorn, enhancing his royal legacy and leadership during the War of the Ring. And so there we have it, Celebrimbor's life in the Second Age and before. His work significantly impacted the course of Middle-earth, particularly through that creation of the three elven rings and his role in the events that led to the War of the Last Alliance. His friendship with the dwarves, his tragic downfall, and his ultimate defiance against Sauron exemplify the complex relationships and legacies of the elves of Tolkien's world. Celebrimbor's story truly stands as a lesson to the dual-edged nature of ambition and the redemptive strength found in sacrifice. He truly left a legacy that shaped the fate of Middle-earth.
3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne. In the land of Mordor where the shadows lie, 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them, in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. In today's video, we will be talking about the 3 rings mentioned in the opening line of that quote, the 3 elven rings. Let's get into it. So, as I'm sure most of you already know, the 3 elven rings were a part of the 20 rings of power that were forged in the Second Age. These rings were intended to be used by Sauron to corrupt the leaders of Middle-earth to his side. 19 of these 20 rings were forged by the elves in Eregion, led by Celebrimbor. 9 of them were crafted for men, 7 for dwarves, and of course, 3 for the elves. Now 16 of these rings, Sauron had a direct hand in their creation. However, the greatest of the rings, the 3 elven rings, Celebrimbor crafted alone. Then after Sauron made the 1 ring in the fires of Mount Doom, his plan was expected to begin. However, after he put the ruling ring onto his finger, all of the elves instantly became aware of him and removed their rings. Absolutely furious at the unexpected turn of events, Sauron declared war on the elves and demanded that the rings be given back to him. Fortunately, they had already hidden the 3 greatest of the rings, but Sauron managed to recover the other 16. He then gave these to mortals, 7 to dwarves and 9 to men, as he knew they would be easier to bend to his will. As we know, the 9 men eventually became Nazgul, and were nothing more than servants to the Dark Lord. The Dwarf Lords did not fall under Sauron's control, but became overwhelmingly obsessed with treasure. We do actually have a full video on the 9 rings, and I'm sure if you guys want to see it, we will cover one on the 7 Dwarven rings as well. Let us know in the comments down below. According to Gandalf, a feature of the Rings of Power that seemed to be shared amongst them all was that a mortal that wore one of them was granted a lifespan far greater than their natural one. It's assumed that this side effect was actually unintentional, as the rings were initially intended to be worn by elves, who were of course already immortal. So the 3 elven rings were Narya, Nenya, and Vilya. Now while these rings were not created to be weapons of war, or as a means to dominate others, their purpose was to protect the elven lands where their wielders resided, and to aid in the healing and resisting of evil. Although they were still linked to the 1 ring in some way, and whoever wore the 1 ring could, with great effort, see the thoughts of those who wore the 3. Each of the 3 rings had special properties, but their powers were quite limited. Narya, also known as the Ring of Fire, was a ruby set in a gold band. It was given by Celebrimbor, along with the ring Vilya, to GIL-GALAD, High King of the Noldor during the Second Age. GIL-GALAD entrusted Narya to his lieutenant Círdan, Lord of the Havens of Mithlond, who kept it after GIL-GALAD's death. After the arrival of the Astari in the Third Age, Círdan, who knew of Gandalf's true duties, gave the ring Narya to him to aid him in his quests. "Take this ring, master," he said, "for your labours will be heavy, but it will support you in the weariness that you have taken upon yourself. For this is the Ring of Fire, and with it may you rekindle hearts in a world that grows chill." It was only Círdan, Elrond and Galadriel that knew Gandalf had the ring throughout the Third Age. Not much is known about when or if Gandalf really used its powers, but we do know that during the siege of Minas Tirith he inspires hope and courage in men wherever he passes. This is a good example of Narya's power. It's said that it had the power to inspire others to resist tyranny, domination and despair, and to hide the wielder from remote observation except by the wearer of the One Ring. It's also thought to have magical properties and fire powers. It's assumed that Gandalf kept the ring as a relic when he journeyed to the Undying Lands. Moving on to Nenya, also known as the White Ring or the Ring of Water. It was the elven ring possessed by Galadriel. It is described as being made of mithril set with a white stone. Nenya's power was said to be preservation, protection and concealment from evil. Galadriel took advantage of these powers by creating and protecting Lothlorien. It's said that, while protected by Nenya, Lothlorien would not fall unless Sauron had personally come to attack it. It's not really clear to me exactly what this power means, as we know that Lorien had definitely been attacked by orcs before, so it doesn't exactly hide it. I would assume it's more of a case of its presence cannot be detected unless Sauron wears the One Ring. Anyway, after the defeat of Sauron, the power of Nenya faded, and with it so did the beauty and magic of Lorien. It was gradually depopulated, and by the time that Arwen went there to die in the Fourth Age, it was deserted and in ruin. Finally, Vilya, also known as the Ring of Air, the Dominant Ring, or the Ring of Sapphire, was the greatest of the 3 rings. Like the other 2 elven rings, it was jewelled. It contained a great blue stone set in a gold band. After Sauron destroyed Eregion, Vilya, along with Narya, was sent to GIL-GALAD far away in Lindon, where it was later given to Elrond by the High Elven King. As GIL-GALAD was the High King of the Noldor Elves at the time of the ring's distribution, it was thought that he was the most fit to take care of the most powerful of the 3 rings. So Elrond bore Vilya for the later years of the Second Age, as well as all of the Third. It's not as clear what Vilya can actually do. It's pretty reasonable to assume that it also has the power to heal and preserve, as it's mentioned in the Silmarillion that Celebrimbor actually created the rings for this reason. It has also been speculated that the ring had minor control over some of the elements, like when Elrond summoned water to attack the Nazgul as they attempted to invade Rivendell. It's also possible that it is the ring that gives Elrond the gift of foresight, but it's just as likely that these powers were natural gifts of him alone. After the destruction of the One Ring and Sauron's defeat, the power of Vilya also faded, and it was taken by Elrond, along with Nenya and Narya, with their wielders Galadriel and Gandalf, to the Undying Lands at the end of the Third Age.
The master of the house was an elf friend, one of those people whose fathers came into the strange stories before the beginning of history, the wars of the evil goblins and the elves and the first men in the north. In those days of our tale, there were still some people who had both elves and heroes of the north for ancestors, and Elrond, the master of the house, was their chief. He was as noble and as fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer. Elrond's special nature is rooted in his extraordinary heritage, which is intricately woven into the fabric of Middle-earth's history. Born in the First Age, Elrond is the son of Eärendil the Mariner and Elwing, 2 figures whose actions directly contributed to the defeat of none other than Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. Eärendil's journey to Valinor to plead for the aid of the Valar was such an important moment in the history of Middle-earth, leading to the War of Wrath and the eventual defeat of Morgoth. Elwing's role in preserving the Silmaril and her union with Eärendil further emphasised the significance of Elrond's lineage. This lineage connects Elrond directly to Luthien, one of the most powerful and beloved elves, and Beren, the mortal man who won her love. Luthien and Beren's story is one of the most celebrated tales in Tolkien's works, symbolising that union of elves and men and the triumph of love and courage over darkness. Elrond's connection to this lineage gives him a unique perspective, blending the mortal and immortal realms in a way that few others could understand. It also places upon him a heavy burden of responsibility as he carries the legacies of both his elves and human ancestors. The choice given to Elrond and his brother ELROS by the Valar to be immortal like the elves or mortal like men further highlights Elrond's unique position. By choosing to live as an elf, Elrond committed himself to a life intertwined with the fate of Middle-earth and its people. His brother ELROS chose mortality and became the first king of Númenor, leading to the line of kings that would eventually produce Aragorn. This decision sets Elrond on a path of leadership and guardianship that would span for thousands of years, making him a key figure in the unfolding histories. His heritage and the burdens it carries make Elrond a character deeply connected to the history and the future of the world, giving him a special status among both elves and men. Elrond's importance is further established through his leadership and foresight during the Second Age, a time of great turmoil and transition in Middle-earth. After the fall of Eregion and the loss of Celebrimbor, the master smith who forged the Rings of Power, Elrond took on the immense responsibility of leading the survivors to safety. In 1697 of the Second Age, he founded the refuge of Rivendell, also known as Imladris, nestled in the foothills of the Misty Mountains. This sanctuary would become a bastion of hope, wisdom and healing, a place where the free peoples could find solace and counsel in times of need. The creation of Rivendell was more than just the establishment of a hidden fortress. It was a manifestation of Elrond's commitment to preserving the knowledge, culture and strength of the elves in an age of increasing darkness. Rivendell became known as a centre of learning, where Elrond gathered scholars, warriors and leaders from all races, elves, men, dwarves and even eventually hobbits, to share knowledge and wisdom. His decision to provide a safe haven for those resisting Sauron's influence demonstrated his dedication to protecting Middle-earth and its inhabitants. This act alone helps show what makes Elrond special, his ability to create and sustain a place of peace and wisdom in a world constantly threatened by evil. Elrond's role in the last alliance of elves and men formed in 3430 of the Second Age further solidifies his status as a key figure. As the lieutenant of GIL-GALAD, the last High King of the Noldor, Elrond played a crucial role in uniting the forces of elves and men against the growing threat of Sauron. The last alliance culminated in the epic Battle of Dagorlad in 3434 and the subsequent siege of Barad-dûr, which lasted for 7 long years. During these battles, Elrond fought valiantly alongside his kin and allies, demonstrating not only his prowess as a warrior, but also his strategic mind and unwavering resolve. Yet, Elrond's wisdom also meant he recognised the consequences of Isildur's refusal to destroy the One Ring, understanding the long shadow it would cast over the future. This moment was somewhat of a turning point in Middle-earth's history, and Elrond's foresight, knowing that the ring's survival would lead to future conflict, underscores his deep understanding of the world and its dangers. His ability to perceive the long-term implications of events and to act accordingly makes Elrond a uniquely insightful and essential leader in Middle-earth. Throughout the Third Age, Elrond's role as a guardian and guide to the free peoples becomes even more pronounced, highlighting the special qualities that set him apart. This era was one of uncertainty and growing darkness as Sauron's influence began to rise once more. During this time, Elrond not only continued to protect Rivendell, but also played a crucial role in shaping the destiny of Middle-earth's future leaders. One of the most significant ways in which Elrond influenced the course of history was through his fostering of Aragorn, the last heir of Isildur. Aragorn, born in 2931 of the Third Age, was taken into Elrond's care after the death of his father, Arathorn II. Elrond recognised the importance of Aragorn's lineage and the role he would one day play in the struggle against Sauron. By raising Aragorn in Rivendell, Elrond ensured that the line of kings would survive, preparing him for the crucial role he would play in the War of the Ring. And it must be said, it wasn't just Aragorn that he brought up in Rivendell. Many of his ancestors spent time in Rivendell as well. But Elrond's relationship with Aragorn also exemplifies his deep compassion and sense of duty. Despite his love for his daughter, Arwen, Elrond initially opposed her union with Aragorn, fearing the sorrow that would come with her choice of mortality. He understood the burden of immortality and the pain that would come with outliving a mortal spouse, a fate that Arwen would inevitably face if she chose to marry Aragorn. However, his eventual acceptance of their love, coupled with his condition that Aragorn must first reclaim his throne, reflects Elrond's understanding of both personal sacrifice and the broader needs of Middle-earth. His ability to balance personal feelings with the greater good is a key aspect of what really makes Elrond so special. His wisdom and leadership were further demonstrated during the Council of Elrond in 3018 of the Third Age, where he guided representatives from all three peoples in deciding the fate of the One Ring. This council, of course held in Rivendell, was a momentous occasion, bringing together figures like Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, Boromir and Frodo, who of course would go up to help make the Fellowship of the Ring. Elrond's role as a convener of this council highlights his ability to bring together disparate groups and individuals to address the most critical issues facing their futures. Elrond's relationships, particularly with his family, reveal the personal sacrifices he made throughout his life, sacrifices that further illuminate his special nature. His relationship with Arwen, marked by love and deep concern, is one of the most emotionally charged aspects of his story. Elrond's internal struggle over Arwen's choice speaks to his profound understanding of the pains of love and loss. He knew that Arwen would eventually face the sorrow of losing her husband, yet he also understood the importance of allowing Arwen to make her own choices, even if it meant enduring great personal grief. His ability to navigate these complex emotions while maintaining his role as a leader and protector is a testament to his character and the special qualities that set him apart. Elrond's connection to the members of the Fellowship of the Ring also underscores his role as that guide and protector. His guidance to Frodo, Aragorn and the other members of the Fellowship was crucial to their success in the quest to destroy the One Ring. Elrond's wisdom and foresight allowed him to see the importance of this quest and the need for a diverse group to undertake it, each member bringing their own strengths and perspectives. By sending his sons Elladan and Elrohir to aid Aragorn in the war, Elrond once again demonstrated his willingness to put the needs of Middle-earth above his own families, even when it meant risking the lives of those he loved. These relationships and the sacrifices they involved show that Elrond's special nature is not just rooted in his wisdom and power, but also in his deep emotional capacity and his willingness to endure personal loss for the greater good. Elrond's ability to connect with others on such a profound level, while also making the difficult decisions required for a leader, further sets him apart as a unique and remarkable character in Tolkien's world. Elrond's departure to Valinor at the end of the Third Age marks the end of his direct influence in Middle-earth, but his legacy remains deeply embedded in its history. His decision to leave symbolises the passing of the Elves from Middle-earth and the beginning of the Age of Men, a transition that Elrond helped to guide through his actions and decisions. The legacy Elrond leaves behind is multifaceted. He ensured the survival of the line of kings through his care for Aragorn, helped secure the future of Middle-earth by guiding the Fellowship and creating a lasting haven in Rivendell. Rivendell, though it would eventually fade of course with the departure of the elves, it remains a symbol of the wisdom and the beauty of that race, and of the sanctuary they provided in times of need. His departure really symbolises that bittersweet nature of change in Tolkien's world. While his leaving signifies the end of the elves' time in Middle-earth, it also marks the beginning of a new era, one in which men take on the responsibility of protecting and nurturing the world. This transition, though filled with sorrow for the loss of the elves, also carries hope for the future, a future that Elrond helped to secure through his actions and decisions. His legacy, therefore, is not just one of the past but also the future, as the lessons he imparted continue to guide all of those who still lived in Middle-earth in the ages to come. And so there we have it. In answering the question, what makes Elrond so special, we can see that it is that combination of his lineage, wisdom, leadership, personal sacrifices, and the profound relationships he nurtured that set him apart. his ability to navigate the complexities of both his immortal and mortal heritage, his role in key historical events, and his deep emotional connections all contribute to his unique status in Middle-earth. So, whether through his role as a leader, a father, a guardian, or a mentor, Elrond's presence is felt in every corner of Middle-earth, making him one of the most richly developed and beloved characters in all of Tolkien's legendarium. His story reminds us that true strength lies not just in power, but in wisdom, compassion, and the willingness to make difficult choices for the greater good. This is what makes Elrond so special, and just why his legacy will endure for generations to come.
In Tolkien's legendarium, there are two fates. One for the firstborn, the Elves, immortality, and another for the secondborn, known as the Gift of Ilúvatar, that is, a mortal life and death. Elves were fated to remain tied to the world, to exist unto the end of times, until Dagor-Dagorath, the final battle. An elf can be slain and their body can die, but their spirit, their fae, endure and departs Middle-earth for the halls of Mandos, there to remain until they are re-embodied to return into the world. For elves, this has not always been counted as a blessing, and surely death has not always been seen as a gift. Elros chose a mortal life and became the first king of Númenor. By the end of his line and the downfall of Númenor, the fear of death was such that Ar-Pharazôn the Golden would make war on the Valar themselves for the sake of deathlessness, albeit through the corruption of Sauron. This brings us to our topic for today, which is the choice facing the brothers Elrond and Elros, and how their lives changed because of those decisions. Their decisions were different, Elros to live a mortal life, and Elrond to be counted among the elves. But nonetheless, the decision was not an easy one and not often faced by another character. Eärendil is Tuor's son and father of Elros, first king of Númenor, and Elrond, their mother being Elwing, daughter of Dior, son of Beren and Luthien. So the problem of the half-elven becomes united in one line. The view is that the half-elven have a power of irrevocable choice, which may be delayed but not permanently. Which kin's fate will they share? Elros chose to be a king and longevous, but mortal, so all his descendants are mortal, and of a specially noble race, but with dwindling longevity. So Aragorn, who, however, has a greater lifespan than his contemporaries, double, though not the original Númenorian treble that of men. Elrond chose to be among the elves. His children, with a renewed elvish strain since their mother was Celebrimbor, daughter of Galadriel, have to make their choices. It is believed that the souls of men go to Ilúvatar when their bodies die, but this is not certain at all. Tolkien speaks often about the uncertain fate of humankind after death, and this leaves room for Middle-earth to be an early age of this world before the coming of Jesus. As a staunch Catholic, even in his legendarium, Tolkien was careful to create a world that could have existed after creation, but before biblical times without violating his beliefs. Now Elros and Elrond, his brother, were descended from the three houses of the Edain, but in part also both from the Eldar and the Maiar, for Idril of Gondolin and Luthien, daughter of Melian, were their foremothers. The Valar indeed may not withdraw the gift of death, which comes to men from Ilúvatar, but in the matter of the half-elven, Ilúvatar gave them the judgment, and they judged that to the sons of Eärendil should be given choice of their own destiny, and Elrond chose to remain with the firstborn, and to him the life of the firstborn was granted. But to Elros, who chose to be a king of men, still a great span of years was allotted, many times that of the men of Middle-earth, and all his line, the kings and lords of the royal house, had long life even according to the measure of the Númenóreans. But Elros lived 500 years and ruled the Númenóreans 400 years and 10. Because of the very unique situation that Eärendil and Elwing were in, they were given the choice to decide for themselves what their fate should be. They could either be counted among the elves or the men. This choice was also then given to their sons, although the reasons for that are not clearly stated anywhere. Here is an idea for the reason though. Had Elrond and Elros been doomed to mortality, this would have been a unique case of two elves having kids that are mortal. Had they been doomed to immortality, it would go against the general verdict that people with mortal blood are, well, mortal. Giving them a choice that respects both their parentage and the decree maybe was just a compromise. Famously, Eärendil, Elwing and Elrond all chose the life of that of the Eldar, while Elros became mortal, and what this meant stayed with them throughout all their time.
I should still be grieved because of the doom that is laid on us. What is that doom? Said Aragorn. That so long as I abide here, she shall live with the youth of the Eldar, answered Elrond, and when I depart, she shall go with me if she so chooses. So you can see how these thoughts stayed with Elrond for a long time, even to the point of Aragorn and Arwen, his daughter, being together. But anyway, the Númenórean kings and other descendants had long lives, typically around 200 years. As Númenor fell to evil ways, the lives of the kings grew shorter. Death ceased to be seen as a gift when the power of Morgoth again came over the hearts of men. Despite this, Elendil lived 322 years and died in battle. His unusually long life, even for a Númenórean, was probably due to his faithfulness to the Valar. Aragorn lived 210 years, but the fear of death would make their lives ever shorter and their end more bitter. Now this yearning grew ever greater with the years, and the Númenóreans began to hunger for the undying city that they saw from afar, and the desire of everlasting life. To escape from death and the ending of delight grew strong upon them, and ever as their power and glory grew greater, their unquiet increased. For though the Valar had rewarded the Dúnedain with long life, they could not take from them the weariness of the world that comes at last, and they died, even their kings of the seed of Eärendil, and the span of their lives was brief in the eyes of the Eldar. Thus it was that a shadow fell upon them, in which maybe the will of Morgoth was at work that still moved in the world, and the Númenóreans began to murmur, at first in their hearts, and then in open words, against the doom of men, and most of all against the ban which forbade them to sail into the west. Elrond Peredhil, however, chose to be counted among the elves, though in later ages he would foster the heirs of his brother, and served the house of GIL-GALAD until the end of the Second Age. And also, by the way here, Peredhil is the Sindarin term for half-elven, if you weren't sure why that came with his name. But now, Rivendell was established during the War of the Elves and Sauron in 1697 of the Second Age, when Eregion was laid to waste, and Elrond was sent from Lindon with a host to aid Eregion in their resistance against Sauron. Elrond arrived too late and was forced back into a valley with the refugees who fled Eregion, and they would make a stronghold. In later years, with the last alliance of elves and men established, the armies of Elendil and Gil-galad encamped at Imladris while they prepared the crossing of the High Pass before then moving southeast to reach Dagorland. Despite this, Elrond always intended his home to be a place of scholarship and of peace, a place of learning and quiet, not an army base or camp. And I will just pause here to say, would you like to see a video on the full story of Elrond, or maybe Elros too? Both of them have more detail to their histories than I am including in this video, so if you would like to see those, please just leave me a comment of the full story of Elrond, the full story of Elros, or the full story of both of the half-elvens, and I will get working on those for you. But anyway, after Isildur's death, and the disaster of the Gladden Fields, Elrond fostered the last surviving son of Isildur. Throughout the Third Age, Lord Elrond faced a number of challenges, foremost in the power of Angmar, which rose significantly in the 14th century and besieged Rivendell from 1356 to 1409 of the Third Age, broken only by reinforcements brought over the mountains from Lothlorien. Angmar rose again in 1974 of the Third Age, when Arthedain fell to Angmar. Elrond sent Glorfindel with a host of elves to meet the armies of Eärendil II and Círdan at the Battle of Fornost, where Angmar was brought to heel for good. After the fall of Angmar and up to and including the events of The Lord of the Rings, Elrond opposed Sauron and fostered the heirs of Isildur, the heirs of his brother, at Rivendell.
After a long time of many battles, he would see the reunification of the House of Elros and the kingdoms of Arnor and Gondor in the person of Aragorn Elessar and his queen, Arwen Evenstar. And yet it's not difficult to see the many sufferings of Elrond throughout all of this, who suffered in the ways that few elves would ever suffer in their lives. First, he was sundered from his wife when she departed for the halls of Mandos before him, after she had been struck by poisoned orc weaponry, and although her wounds were healed by Elrond, she was never truly free of them. And secondly, sundered until the end of time from his daughter when she chose that gift of men and a mortal fate. We do not know the choice of Elrond's twin sons though, Elladan and Alrohir. They may have chosen to go to the west, or they may have chosen mortal lives, in which case Elrond was sundered from them as well. Descendants of Elros and any half-elven who chose mortality must remain fully mortal and cannot choose the fate of the evils. Descendants of Elrond and any half-elven may choose their fate, that of mortal life and that of the elves and immortality. The reason for the choice of Elros is not outright stated, but there are circumstances that we know that could give us a hint at what made Elros as he did. The early childhoods of Elros and Elrond were tragic. Most of this can be laid at the feet of the sons of Feanor and their ceaseless seeking after the Silmarils. When the sons of Feanor raided the settlement at the mouths of Sirion, Elwing threw herself into the sea to prevent Mithras and Maglor from taking the Silmaril. Her sons survived her, and though Eärendil and Elwing feared that their sons would be murdered, Maglor took pity on them, cherishing them. For Maglor took pity upon Elros and Elrond, and he cherished them, and love grew after between them, as little might be thought. But Maglor's heart was sick and weary with the burden of the dreadful oath. It is not possible to say how long the boys stayed with Maglor, and presumably Mithras too, who were together from the time of the Battle of Sudden Flame when Maglor's gap was overrun. While it's possible that they were fostered by Maglor for quite a while, until coming of age, which is said to be about 50 years old, although they do not reach full maturity until 100. It is also quite possible for them to have been placed in the care of GIL-GALAD or other kin. Whatever acts they may have committed beforehand, Mithras and Maglor tried to raise Elrond and Elros the best that they could though, as if they were their own children. Elrond mentions the choice as a doom that is laid upon them, him and his children. They live the life of the Eldar, while Elrond lives in Middle-earth, but they have to choose if they would not rather live a mortal life. Why they were given a special doom is not explained anywhere, but I think the reasoning mentioned above can be applied to Elrond's children as well. They were children of immortal elves, but had a strain of mortal blood in them. Elrond and Celebrimbor, despite living immortal lives, would have been damned to see all their children live a very short life, and die if they had been doomed to a mortal life by default. The fate of Elros' children, however, was not in conflict with their parentage, nor with the general rule of all with mortal blood have to have a mortal fate. They were mortal, born of a mortal mother and father, so the situation was different than that of Eärendil and Elwing's children. Brother to the first king of Númenor and foster parent and father figure to the heirs of Isildur, it is worth mentioning that Elrond's greatest decisions were in what he chose not to do. It was his choice to not claim the crown of the High King, despite many seeing him as the heir to Gil-galad. Of his pedigree there can be no doubt. In the person of Elrond we have both the uncrowned High King of the Noldor and Sindar by genealogy and inheritance, if not by title or choice. On the Sindarin side, there could be absolutely no doubt as the eldest living direct descendant of the High King of Doriath Eleuthingol. The Noldor claim is perhaps only contested by Galadriel, sister of Finrod Felagund, with Finrod being the great-grandson of Fingolfin and grandchild of Turgon, but even then it is not certain. In any case, his pedigree was immaculate, but was not the reason for his actions, nor for the power Elrond wielded. His power came from generations of good reputation and service to the people. The power he is given is used to protect and serve the people of Middle-earth. Elrond has many times put his life on the line to preserve the people and the peace of the lands. His home, Imladris, was built as a sanctuary for the refugees from the wars against Sauron in the east. He opposed evil all of his life and protected the descendants of his brother Elros. The amount of tragedy seen in Elrond's life is inexplicable, as we cannot fathom the wounds inflicted by time, the wars, the sickness, the death, and the evil. Elrond was a firm pillar against these forces in his long life, a mighty presence of nobility and grace that spoke to his goodness. To have endured the life of Elrond would be difficult for anyone, as he saw so many friends and family members die. To remain for millennia, to watch the waning of the world, tied forever to Arda, it is easy to understand why it is said that, in the end, all beings come to admire and become jealous of the gift of men. And this is why Elros' story may be so much shorter. It was perhaps less tragic, though for the purposes of the story, Elros remains via bloodline beside his brother until the Fourth Age, when the kingship is restored, with Arwen making the same choices as Elros in the end. Really, maybe Elros could just see how an immortal life might not necessarily be the greatest choice of them all. So with that, we have looked at the decisions made by Elrond and Elros, the two twin brothers born to Eärendil and Elwing, later fostered by Maglor. Elrond lived a long life of much tragedy and hardship in Middle-earth, yet he never gave up and continued to be a beacon of hope to those around him. Elros was granted the honour of being the first king of Númenor, but only lived to be 500, which, yes, in terms of men it is a very long time, but in terms of immortality, 500 years is definitely coming under an only amount of time. A definitive answer is never given for his differing decision to his brother, but we can assume that it is just what he felt like it was right to do, that he felt that this was the path that Eru wanted him to go on, that maybe the gift of men was a gift that was really worth taking. At the end of the day though, it is hard to say which of these options is truly a gift and which is truly a curse. You can live an everlasting life, free of sickness and aging, but you must accept that any mortal you care for, you shall outlast. Whereas you could live a life with a limited age, risk sickness, and also never risk fading with the world, losing your interest or motivation as even the most beautiful would become normal. Mortality is always labelled as the gift of men, not a curse, and it really can make you think.
Welcome today to a journey through the ages of the Elven King of the Woodland Realm, Thranduil. We take a look back from his time potentially in the First Age in the lands of Doriath all the way to the end of the Fourth Age with the rejuvenated Greenwood the Great, later known as Erin Lasgallen. His tale is one of resilience and of wisdom and a connection to the natural world. While Tolkien provides details about many parts of his life, there are also large sections where nothing is really said of note, so we might be doing a little bit of interpretation today, but I will specify any fact from personal thought, don't you worry. So let's not waste any more time and have a look at the life of Thranduil.
I offer you my help.
For us today, Thranduil's story begins in those wondrous lands of Doriath, those that are nestled within the lands of Beleriand. This ancient forest, this beautiful land is imbued with tall trees and wondrous streams, as well as having its air filled with those elven songs. And this is where the son of Oropher, the elven prince Thranduil, lives his early life, or so we think. While these kind of details paint such a vivid picture of the kind of wondrous land Thranduil grew up in, it is all just a bit of a what if because Tolkien never details any specifics from his childhood, no friendships, no events, nothing particular apart from the kind of beautiful land he would have lived in. It is kind of like I've hinted at. We don't even know if he was definitely born at the end of the First Age, or if maybe perhaps it was even as late as the beginning of the Second. However, it does seem to be more strongly thought that it was at the end of the First. It really just leaves everything open to a bit of interpretation. In this peaceful setting, it is likely that Thranduil developed a profound connection with nature, a characteristic integral to his later identity. We can surmise that Thranduil, growing up in Doriath, was immersed in elven culture, learning their language, arts, and traditions. The rich lore of the elves, including things like tales of the Valar and the creation of the world, we can only assume would have been integral to his upbringing. However, specifics about Thranduil's personal experiences during these years, such as his individual interests, friendships, or unique events he may have witnessed, these remain unexplored in Tolkien's texts. This part of his life, thus, is open to interpretation and imagination, offering a canvas for envisioning the early years of a future elven king in the tranquil yet vibrant life of Doriath before the shadow of war enveloped the land. The cataclysmic War of Wrath is what brings the end to that first age, and this means many big changes for the lands of Middle-earth. The lands of Beleriand exist no more, Middle-earth has been reshaped, and this means upheaval and relocation for so many people. Thranduil, along with his father Orifer, is forced to flee the devastation. This exodus, part of the Great Migration of Elves to the east, signifies a pivotal shift from the known beauty of Doriath to new, uncharted territories. Tolkien's writings, while not detailing this migration extensively, imply a period of significant transformation and adaptation for Thranduil and his kin, so one might only imagine the challenges and experiences Thranduil faced during this period. The journey to Greenwood the Great, the one later known as Mirkwood, is again not explicitly chronicled either. However, it is understood to be a critical juncture in Thranduil's life, laying the groundwork for his future role as a leader. This transition, filled with uncertainty, would have undoubtedly shaped his resilience and perspective on loss, change, and the preservation of elven culture in a rapidly evolving world. As we now move into the Second Age of Middle-earth, Thranduil and Orifer settle themselves in Greenwood the Great. This era marks a whole new chapter in Thranduil's life, as they settle themselves amongst the Sylvan Elves who live in this wondrous and magical land of natural beauty. Orifer assumes kingship over the Greenwood Sylvan Elves. Thranduil, inheriting his father's wisdom and strength, plays a significant role in bridging the cultures of the Sindar and the Sylvan Elves, though specific details of his actions during this period, again, are not extensively documented. This time is characterized by relative peace and the absence of the dark forces that would later plague the forest. Thranduil's deepening connection with the natural world and his growing leadership skills are inferred from his Sindarin heritage and future role as king, though Tolkien again does not provide explicit accounts of his activities during this era.
Death is upon you. The flames of war are upon you.
As the Second Age comes towards its end, it is met with that climax of the War of the Last Alliance, and this is again such a pivotal moment in Thranduil's life. Elves, men and dwarves have come together to fight against Sauron, and Thranduil is there with the Sylvan Elves of Greenwood. Being led by his father on the plains of Dagorlad, Thranduil is involved in such a pivotal moment in Middle-earth's history. Thranduil's role in this war, while you may have guessed it, not elaborated in detail, is crucial in his transition from prince to king. The death of his father comes from the first assault upon Mordor. He attacked before GIL-GALAD gave the word, so not just he but over half of his people lost their lives too. This battle profoundly impacted Thranduil. This loss not only affects him personally, but also influences his perspective on war leadership and the responsibilities that come with ruling. One poor decision could cost many beings their lives. In the aftermath of the War of the Last Alliance, Thranduil assumes the kingship of Greenwood the Great. His return to Greenwood marks the beginning of his reign, where he is presumed to have adopted a cautious stance towards external affairs and prioritized the protection of his realm, a characterization inferred from his later actions and the overall narrative of Middle-earth.
A shadow that grows in the dark. A sleepless malice as black as the oncoming wall of night.
Thranduil's rule over the woodland realm is one of steadfast guardianship over encroaching darkness. Sauron has returned in secret to Dol Guldur, and that ominous, mysterious evil is finally spreading throughout the forest, turning it into Mirkwood. But Thranduil is trying to focus his energy against this. There are more and more growing threats, from the likes of giant spiders to other evil beings. Thranduil just wants to protect his people. Tolkien's narrative suggests that Thranduil's leadership, often seen as isolationist, is actually a strategic response to these emerging dangers. He fortifies his kingdom, creating a stronghold deep within the forest. This fortress serves as a sanctuary for his people and a defense against these external threats. The Elvenking's halls are an architectural marvel as described in The Hobbit. These halls, carved into a cave system, serve as a testament to the elves' craftsmanship and their harmonious relationship with nature. The intricate design and grandeur of the halls reflect Thranduil's status and the cultural richness of his kingdom. One of the significant challenges during Thranduil's reign was the dark influence emanating from Dol Guldur. After it is revealed that the stronghold housed Sauron himself, it is easy to understand why it appeared so threatening. Thranduil's efforts are, therefore, increasingly geared towards protecting Mirkwood from this dark presence, an endeavour that defines much of his rule during the Third Age. Thranduil navigates the intricate politics of Middle-earth, ensuring the Woodland Realm remains a haven for his people amidst a world of change though. His reign spans centuries, and this underscores his commitment to preserving the Elven way of life like we mentioned before, marking him as a key figure in its history. Tolkien describes Thranduil as a fair and noble elf, known for his love of feasts and celebrations. This portrayal adds a personal dimension to this character, highlighting his continued appreciation for the finer aspects of elven culture and his capacity for joy and merriment, balancing that more serious role as a ruler that is often put to the front.
A quest to reclaim a homeland and slay a dragon.
The events of 2941 of the Third Age finally come to pass, and these are important because these are the events told in The Hobbit. Thranduil starts to take less of a back seat and has to become more involved with the main narrative that is going on in Middle-earth. He has to once again look outside of his own borders. Thranduil's interactions with Bilbo Baggins and Thorin Oakenshield's company are crucial. Initially, he imprisons the dwarves, reflecting his cautious nature towards outsiders. When Thorin and his company venture into Mirkwood, they do inadvertently cross paths with Thranduil's realm, and the Elvenking's subsequent capture of the dwarves, while seen as a contentious act, does reflect his deep-seated responsibility towards safeguarding his kingdom. He is wary of any foreign presence that could pose a threat to his realm, especially given the historical strife between elves and dwarves. The dwarves escape though, and Thranduil understands their true mission, although he never believes they could succeed in their goal. However, not long after this, he hears word that Smaug has fallen, but he assumes the dwarves must have fallen as well. I mean, how could they have survived this? And knowing the treasures that the dragon once guarded, he is keen to claim it for himself. On his journey, he learns of the true devastation of Lake Town's destruction too, and does offer to help those people, meaning that the men of Lake Town, led by Bard, now joined the elves in discovering that, in fact, Thorin's company did survive, and they had control of the mountain. There was a tense standoff, and Thorin refused to share anything that was inside, but due to Bilbo Baggins' smart thinking, the Arkan Stone was given to Thranduil so that negotiations could begin without bloodshed. That is not to say there would be no battle though. The next day, Dane Ironfoot arrived with backup for Thorin, and so the dwarves began to attack. This is when the orcs of the Misty and Grey Mountains, led by Bolg, son of Azog, attacked, and the others then joined forces to fight this greater enemy in the conflict that would be the one that becomes known as the Battle of Five Armies. Elves, dwarves, and men versus orcs and wargs. Thranduil's involvement in the Battle of Five Armies is a crucial moment, as although he is initially reluctant to engage in the conflict, he ultimately joins forces with the Men of Dale and the Dwarves of the Lonely Mountain to combat the common threat of the orcs and wargs. This alliance, although uneasy, showcases Thranduil's ability to put aside long-standing grievances for the greater good of Middle-earth. The battle itself is a turning point for Thranduil, who witnesses more of the horrors and costs of war. His decision-making during this crisis, including the eventual extension of aid and support to the people of Lake Town, reveals a compassionate side to his character, balancing his kingly duties with a broader sense of responsibility to the wider world. Thranduil's actions during this period demonstrate his complex nature as a leader, protective of his realm, yet capable of empathy and alliance when the need arises. His involvement in the events of The Hobbit is such a pivotal chapter in his long reign, one that further cements his legacy as one of the key figures in the history of Middle-earth. And it is also worth mentioning here that Thranduil is of course the father of Legolas Greenleaf, a key member of the Fellowship of the Ring. While Tolkien never delves deep into their personal relationship, this familial tie adds another layer to Thranduil's character, connecting him more directly to the central events of The Lord of the Rings 2. We do not even know when Legolas was born or who his mother was, as well as not knowing if Legolas was even around for the events of The Hobbit either. He may well have been involved in the Battle of the Five Armies, or maybe, considering how Thranduil witnessed the loss of his own father, he didn't want Legolas to go to war with him. This has never been specified or rewritten, so it's one of those parts again that is just a bit of an educated guess. As the Third Age progresses towards its end, we reach the War of the Ring, and Thranduil definitely comes up against some challenges here. Although Sauron isn't now directly inside of Mirkwood anymore within Dol Guldur and has been sent back to Mordor, the threats are still at his doorstep. The dark presence of Mirkwood has not been fully removed yet. In the March of 3018, the creature Gollum is delivered to Thranduil as a prisoner by Gandalf and Aragorn to keep him safe and under watch. However, 3 months later Gollum manages to escape, and this is what leads to Thranduil to send Legolas to Rivendell to pass on this news to Lord Elrond, and then of course from there, the Fellowship of the Ring is formed. As for Thranduil at home, he has around a year of relative calmness, but in the March of 3019, his lands come under attack. Sauron's forces that had been gathering in Dol Guldur attacked Mirkwood, with the Orcs timing this with the second assault on Lorien II, as well as the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. This conflict was known as the Battle Under the Trees, and despite a hard-fought battle, Thranduil came out as the victor. The fall of Sauron marks a turning point for Middle-earth, bringing an end to a prolonged period of strife. Post-war, Galadriel cleanses Dol Guldur once and for all, and Thranduil collaborates with Celeborn in a joint effort to cleanse and rejuvenate the forest. The renaming of Mirkwood to Erin Las Galan, the Wood of the Green Leaves, signifies a renewal of the forest's ancient splendour. The forest is then divided, with Celeborn claiming the southern part, Thranduil claiming the northern part, and the two also gifting the middle to the Beornings and Woodmen. The conclusion of the War of the Ring and its aftermath represent significant chapters in Thranduil's life. His resilience, unwavering commitment to his people, and his influential role in the rejuvenation of his realm underscore his legacy as a sageous and noble ruler. Thranduil's actions during this period, as derived from Tolkien's Legendarium, mark him as a key figure who played a vital part in ushering in an era of peace and renewal for the Woodland realm. It is now the Fourth Age of Middle-earth, and Thranduil, albeit without much detail by Tolkien, is assumed to have just continued his rule of Greenwood the Great, or Mirkwood, or in fact now known as Erin Las Galan. It is inferred under Thranduil's leadership, the forest regained some of its natural beauty and that majesty that it once held. A really great thing. This age is a time of significant change for the Elves of Middle-earth, many of whom choose to depart for the Undying Lands, seeking respite from the world's weariness. Thranduil's ultimate fate is not specifically mentioned, leaving room for, again, interpretation. It is plausible, given the patterns observed among elves in Tolkien's world, that Thranduil might also have eventually journeyed to the Undying Lands, seeking peace after centuries of stewardship and conflict. Thranduil's legacy, as inferred from the narrative, is that of a king who adeptly navigated the challenges of his time. His leadership, initially marked by a cautious approach, adapts to the needs of his realm and the broader world, showcasing his wisdom and courage. His role in restoring and protecting the Woodland realm is seen as a testament to his deep connection with the forest and his commitment to his people's well-being. While Tolkien's writings only partially detail Thranduil's life, his narrative remains a fascinating and integral part of the Legendarium, embodying the enduring allure of the depth of the elven folk. So there we have it, a look at Thranduil's life, or at least of much of it as we know, from the forests of Doriath to the epic realm of Erin Las Galan in the Fourth Age. His profound connection to the natural world and his everlasting support of his people really makes him such an incredible character, and that stays with him throughout his time in Middle-earth. His journey, although only partially really told by Tolkien, is one of great interest and one of a great leader. Through wars, migrations, and the shifting sands of time, Thranduil stands as a symbol of adaptability and enduring wisdom. His reign, marked by both isolationist tendencies and courageous alliances, showcases a leader who evolves with the needs of his realm and the broader world. As the Elves' presence in Middle-earth diminishes, Thranduil's narrative offers a poignant reminder of their legacy, a testament to their deep bond with nature and their unwavering spirit. At the end of the day, he just remains as such a compelling character throughout all the changes in Middle-earth. When most people think of the Lord of the Rings, they picture brave hobbits, the return of a king, and a dark power rising in Mordor. But what if we told you there's another layer to this story, older, deeper, and far more ancient? Because while men and hobbits were busy playing their part, the elves were watching, guiding, mourning, fading. This is the story not from the Shire, but from Rivendell, from Lothlorien, from the golden eyes of those who remember everything that came before. This is the Lord of the Rings through elven eyes. By the time Frodo Baggins sets out from the Shire, the elves have already lived through millennia of sorrow, sacrifice, and fading glory. Their kingdoms are no longer growing, they are enduring. Lothlorien shines with a natural beauty, but it is a beauty maintained by Galadriel's ring of power, not by the strength of a thriving people. Rivendell, once a refuge for warriors and lawmasters, has become a quiet sanctuary, a place of counsel more than command. To elves like Elrond and Galadriel, the War of the Ring isn't just a threat to the free peoples. It is the end of an age, the final struggle of an ancient world before it slips into shadow and myth. They don't fight for power or dominion. They fight to preserve what little remains of a time that is already slipping away. The ring's re-emergence signals more than Sauron's return. It signals the end of the elves' time in Middle-earth, and they know it. To many, the Fellowship of the Ring feels like a story driven by men, guided by a wizard and carried on the backs of hobbits. But from the elves' point of view, their role is subtle yet foundational. It begins in Rivendell, under the guidance of Elrond, one of the oldest and wisest beings left in Middle-earth. Half-elven by blood, but elven in spirit, Elrond understands better than most what is at stake. He lived through the rise and fall of Sauron once already. He saw GIL-GALAD perish, he watched Isildur fail, and so when the Council of Elrond convenes, it's not just about choosing who will carry the ring, it's about correcting the mistakes of the past. Elrond's refusal to take the ring himself or entrust it to elven hands isn't born of cowardice. It's wisdom. The elves know the danger of domination masked as salvation. They have already wielded the three rings, Vilya, Nenya, and Narya, crafted without Sauron's direct influence, but still tied to the one. If the one survives, so do the three. But if it is destroyed, their power will fade. The elves are not just risking the safety of the world, they're sacrificing their own legacy. Galadriel too plays a critical role, not through direct action, but through testing and preparing others. When Frodo offers her the ring, she sees what she could become, a queen, beautiful and terrible as the dawn, but she refuses. I pass the test, she says. That choice ripples through the rest of the story, for if even Galadriel can turn away, there is hope that others might too. And then come the gifts. Not weapons of destruction, but tools of survival and memory. The cloaks, the lembas, the light of Eärendil. Each becomes vital in the journey ahead. These are not random trinkets. They are the elves' final blessing upon the mortal world. To the elves, the Fellowship is not just a quest to destroy evil, it is the last great hope that the world they've loved can survive without them. For the elves, the War of the Ring is not just a battle, it is a funeral march for their time in Middle-earth. As Sauron rises, many elves sense the inevitability of change. They do not see this war as one they can win or lose in a traditional sense. Victory will not mean restoration, it will mean fading with dignity. The world of men is coming, and the elves are, at last, stepping aside. If we look closely at Lothlorien, a realm so untouched by time it feels like an echo of the First Age, but the very magic that keeps it so, the Ring of Nenya wielded by Galadriel, like we've said, relies on that power of the One. If the One Ring is destroyed, so too is the sustaining magic of Lorien. Galadriel knows this, yet still she supports the quest. She chooses the fading of her realm over the domination of all others. The same is of course true in Rivendell. Elrond continues to advise and support the Free Peoples, knowing full well that success will eventually mean the end of his home, his power, and even his daughter's immortal life. The Sylvan Elves of Mirkwood continue to guard their forest from the encroaching darkness of Dol Guldur, knowing the odds and knowing that they stand alone. Yet they fight not for glory, not for dominance, but to preserve what little light remains. To see the world changing and to choose not to stand in its way, that is the quiet tragedy of the elves. They could have resisted. They could have clung tighter to their realms and rings and immortality, but instead, they let go. They help Frodo, they aid Aragorn, they support Gandalf. And they do it knowing that when all is done, they will become forgotten by the world they helped save. The elves see clearer than most. This war is not about power or conquest. It is about legacy. And in that way, they win by choosing to lose. The defeat of Sauron marks a victory for those Free Peoples. But, like we've said, for the elves, it's the beginning of the end. With the destruction of the One Ring, that power in those 3 elven rings fades. The age of preservation ends. Lothlorien finally begins to diminish. Rivendell grows quieter and quieter. The once bright enclaves of elvenkind begin to slip away like a dream upon waking. Galadriel, Elrond, even Gandalf, the bearers of the 3 by the end, know what must come next, and so they prepare for their final journey across the sea, not as an escape, but as a return to the west, to Valinor, to the undying lands. This is not death, but it is an ending. And for those who stay behind, like Legolas, the change is felt keenly. He wanders the forests of Fangorn, sails down the Anduin, but even he knows Middle-earth is no longer a land for the elves. Eventually, he too will sail west, taking Gimli with him in fact, one of the last whispers of elven presence in a world now ruled by men. The elves do not linger, they fade. Not because they were defeated, but because they were never meant to endure this long in the world of change. Their age ends not with a bang, but with a soft farewell in a true elven way. The ships leave from the Grey Havens. Frodo boards, as does Bilbo, but it is the elves who lead them, because they understand that some journeys are not about where you go, but about what you leave behind. So there we have it. When we look at The Lord of the Rings through elven eyes, the story becomes something altogether more tragic, more ancient, and more inevitable. This wasn't their war, not really. It was the last breath of their time in Middle-earth, a fading song played out beneath trees they once planted. They fought not to reclaim glory, but to pass the world on in peace, to see the last light guarded before it dimmed. And they did so with grace, wisdom, and quiet sorrow. Elves don't age the way we do, but they feel time like no one else. Every forest cut, every mountain marred, every friend lost. They carry all of it, forever. So by the end of the War of the Ring, the victory is truly bittersweet. Evil is defeated, but that world they knew is gone. Men will now shape the Fourth Age and beyond, and the elves, they just become legend, and those legends, they become myths, and some then pass out of all knowledge and writings. So when you next read The Lord of the Rings, remember this: it's not just a story of hobbits and kings and dark lords, it's also the swan song of a people who never truly belonged in this world, but they gave everything to protect it. Elves are known as the Master Archers, but have you ever wondered why this is? Let's look at this today. It is not just talent. It is a big part of Elven culture, but there is also more to it than just wanting to defend their lands and protect their homes. So join me as we explore how everything comes together and the elves end up standing head and shoulders above the rest with their unmatched skills with a bow and arrow. Elves live forever, unlike humans, dwarves, or hobbits. This means that they have all the time in the world to get very good at many different skills, which includes with the likes of bows and arrows. Imagine if you could practice something every day for hundreds or even thousands of years. You'd be amazing at it, right? That's exactly what happens with elves and archery. Because they don't age like we do. They spend centuries perfecting their aim and learning every little trick about shooting arrows. It's not just about being strong or fast, it's about having the time to get every detail right, every single time. Consider this idea that was made popular by Malcolm Gladwell, and that is the 10,000 hour rule. Now what this basically means is you need to practice something for 10,000 hours, and that is practice it properly and correctly to become a master of it. For a human, that means practicing something 10 hours a week for 20 years to become a master of it. Now that shows dedication. However, this works out slightly differently for an elf because they wouldn't need to cram everything into such a short space of time. Technically, they could practice for 10 hours a year for 1,000 years and come to the same point, or 1 hour a week for less than 200 years to get to that same point as well. It just shows that they wouldn't have to make as big of a commitment as a human would to reach the same level of expertise, and it wouldn't be that hard for them to go above and beyond this. They know their bows and arrows inside and out because they've had the time to work with them, fix mistakes, and try new things over and over again. And it's not just about individual practice. Elves share their skills with each other, passing down knowledge from one generation to the next. So every elf learns from the vast experience of their entire community, making them even better. In the end, the secret to an elf's incredible skill with the bow isn't just natural talent. It's all the time they have to learn, to practice, and to perfect their craft. This dedication over centuries is one of the things that sets them apart as the best archers in Middle-earth.
Legolas, what do your elf eyes see?
Besides living for longer, elves do have super sharp senses. They can see farther, hear better than pretty much anyone else in Middle-earth. Imagine being able to spot a tiny bird in a tree from really far away, or hearing the soft footsteps of a cat on grass. Elves can do this and much more. Their eyes and ears are so good, they can notice things that others simply can't. I mean, consider this from the Two Towers chapter of the Riders of Rohan. "Riders!" cried Aragorn, springing to his feet. "Many riders on swift steeds are coming towards us." "Yes," said Legolas. "There are 105. Yellow is their hair and bright are their spears. Their leader is very tall." Aragorn smiled. "Keen are the eyes of the elves," he said. "Nay, the riders are little more than 5 leagues distant," said Legolas. 5 leagues is over 17 miles, or 27.5 kilometers. That's insane, and Legolas brushes this off as though it's nothing even slightly impressive. So when it comes to archery, being able to see your target this clearly, no matter how far or how dimly lit, is a huge advantage. Elves can easily aim and hit targets that others wouldn't even be able to see. Their sharp hearing also plays a big part. An elf can hear an enemy sneaking up behind them or listen to the wind changing directions. This helps them understand exactly where to aim their arrow so it flies straight to the target, even if the wind is trying to push it off course. Thanks to their incredible senses, elves don't just shoot arrows, they make every shot count. Their ability to see clearly and hear sharply means they can handle any challenge with ease. This is another reason why they're considered the top archers, capable of feats that seem almost magical to the rest of us. Now let's talk about how elves move. They are not just quick, but they move with a smoothness and control that is really hard to find anywhere else. And this isn't just nice to watch, it also helps make them better with a bow. Picture someone moving so smoothly and quickly, they almost seem to be part of the wind. That's how the elves move. This natural ability to glide and change direction effortlessly is a big deal for archery. It means they can shoot arrows accurately even when they're running, jumping, or dodging. Elves' control over their bodies is top notch. They know exactly how to stand, how to breathe, and how to move to make each shot perfect. The bow isn't just a tool for them, it's like an extension of their arm. They can make it do whatever they want, which is why they can hit targets others can't even imagine hitting. How many there were the company could not count. The affray was sharp, but the orcs were dismayed by the fierceness of the defense. Legolas shot 2 through the throat. Just this example shows the accuracy of Legolas. Even during a mad skirmish inside the depths of Moria, he can still be that accurate with his shot, really representing his kin well. Their grace also means they're super good at staying hidden and moving silently. In a forest, an elf can move around without making a single sound, surprising their enemies and protecting their home without ever being seen. All this agility and grace make elves not just great archers, but almost like artists with their bows. They show us that being good at something isn't just about strength, it's also about how you move and carry yourself. For elves, every movement is part of their skill with the bow.
For you, Legolas, is a bow of the Galadrim, worthy of the skill of our woodland kin.
Elves' mastery in crafting bows and arrows is renowned. A testament not just to their skill, but to their profound bond with the natural world. This craftsmanship is deeply rooted in their culture, reflecting a harmonious blend of artistry, reverence for nature, and unparalleled expertise. Tolkien's descriptions often hint at the elves' creations being far superior, not merely because of the physical materials used, but due to their intention, care, and the respect for nature imbued in every piece. Their work is described as an embodiment of beauty, utility, and harmony with the environment, showcasing the elves' intimate understanding of and connection to the world around them. It is this deep respect and knowledge that elevate their craftsmanship beyond mere physical creation. While Tolkien's texts celebrate the extraordinary qualities of elven work, suggesting a level of perfection and connection to their environment, they also leave room for interpretation on how this is achieved. By focusing on the elves' respect for their materials, drawn from the very essence of nature and their unparalleled skill honed over centuries, we understand that their creations are not just tools, but reflections of the elves' philosophy, their identity, and their profound bond with the earth. This approach to craftsmanship, deeply intertwined with their way of life and their surroundings, is what sets elves apart, making their archery not just a skill, but an extension of their very being. Of course, with the way elves use to learn a bow and arrow, it's not just for fun. They use it to protect their homes, their lands, and the people they love. When danger comes, being great with a bow and arrow is a huge part on how they keep everything and everyone safe. Think about how useful being able to shoot arrows with amazing accuracy would be if you needed to defend your home. For elves, this isn't just a thought, it is reality. They've been part of many big battles throughout history, always using their archery to fight off enemies trying to invade their peaceful lands. Now, of course, I'm not saying that's the only weapon they ever use, but it has definitely been a popular one for them. If we consider a moment with Legolas again, this time discussing that potentially 100 archers from Mirkwood could help swing the odds in their favour before the Battle of Helm's Deep. I wish there were more of your kin among us, but even more would I give for 100 good archers of Mirkwood. We shall need them. At this stage, there were 2,000 Rohirrim inside Helm's Deep, as there were still 1,000 more to come later with Gandalf. So that is saying, adding 100 Mirkwood archers to those 2,000 Rohirrim already there would really turn the tides of battle, make them almost favourites or more comfortable in their victory. That is such a big difference with such a small amount added. Their added accuracy, shooting from the deeping wall, it could have made all the difference. The bows and arrows they've crafted so carefully come into play here too. Because they're so well made, they help elves shoot farther and more accurately. But as I've mentioned, it's not just about fighting. Elves always try to protect nature and their lands during battles, making sure that the forests they love so much don't get harmed. Their respect for life means they use their skills to avoid unnecessary fighting whenever possible, only using their archery to defend when they really have to. Elves are peaceful, but when their homes are threatened, they use their unmatched archery skills for defense. This is just another reason why elves are known as the best archers around. While elves stand out as master archers, there are many skilled warriors inside of Middle-earth, so it is probably worth touching upon these. The dwarves, for instance, are renowned for their craftsmanship and strength, favouring axes and hammers in battle. Their archery, although it is competent, it lacks the elves' finesse and connection to their weapons. Men, on the other hand, show versatility in warfare, including archery. However, their skills often reflect their shorter lifespans and less focused training, making them less consistent compared to the eternal practice of the elves. And then why not mention the hobbits, with their love for simplicity and a peaceful life too. They rarely engage in archery outside of hunting and sport, lacking the elves' dedication to mastering the bow for combat and defense. So as I hope you can see, these comparisons highlight how the elves position themselves to be the premier archers, unmatched by any other race in Middle-earth. So there we have it, the journey through why the elves are the greatest marksmen in Middle-earth. It is more than just a hobby to them, it is almost like a way of life. From their centuries of learning, keen senses and swift movements to their deep bond with nature and artistry in crafting bows and arrows. Archery for elves isn't just about skill, it's woven into their culture, history and the very essence of their being. As we've seen, their remarkable abilities with the bow are a testament to Tolkien's vision of unity with the natural world and the profound depth of storytelling. And so, with all that, thank you for joining me on this journey today into the exploration into the heart of Elvish archery.
That still only counts as one!
Welcome to this video about the legendary elven warrior from Middle-earth, Legolas Greenleaf. Since his first appearance in J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings series, Legolas has captured the hearts of fans around the world with his incredible skills as an archer, his unmatched agility and speed, and his calm and collected demeanour in the face of danger. In this video, we'll explore what makes Legolas so special and why he has become one of the most iconic characters in fantasy literature and film. From his background and training as a member of the Woodland Realm to his bond with his best friend Gimli and his pivotal role in the battles of Middle-earth, we'll delve into all the reasons why Legolas is a fan favourite. So whether you're a die-hard fan of The Lord of the Rings or simply curious about what makes this character so special, sit back and enjoy as we explore the many talents and qualities that make Legolas stand out amongst the heroes of Middle-earth. While Legolas features prominently in the Lord of the Rings films, we would be far from the first to point out how different the two characters are from the one in the book. In translation from book to film, some things are lost or lessened, and a lot of what made Legolas such an engaging member of the Fellowship is lost in that translation. In the film, we have a stoic, near ethereal being who is not overly troubled by his emotion. In the book, however, Legolas wears his heart on his sleeve, and in one moment, on the path of Caradhras, he sings a song that is so moving he brings himself to tears and has to stop. But really, he is a much more cheerful character and is marked by his cheer throughout the quest of the ring.
And you have my bow.
But to return to that moment on the mountain, we have a nice quote here to introduce us to the personalities of everyone at the moment of the quest as they are attempting to make this perilous crossing. It is a bit of a longer quote, but it informs us of the characters at play so well that I figured it was worth quoting in full. "If Gandalf would go before us with a bright flame, he might melt a path for you," said Legolas. The storm had troubled him little, and he alone of the company remained still light of heart. "If elves could fly over mountains, they might fetch the sun to save us," answered Gandalf, "but I must have something to work on. I cannot burn snow." "Well," said Boromir, "when heads are at a loss, bodies must serve, as we say in my country. The strongest of us must seek a way. See, through all this now snow-clad, our path as we came up, turned about that shoulder of rock down yonder. It was there that the snow first began to burden us. If we could reach that point, maybe it would prove easier beyond. It is no more than a furlong off, I guess." "Then let us force a path thither, you and I," said Aragorn. Aragorn was the tallest of the company, but Boromir, little less in height, was broader and heavier in build. He led the way, and Aragorn followed him. Slowly they moved off, and were soon toiling heavily. In places the snow was breast high, and often Boromir seemed to be swimming or burrowing with his great arms rather than walking. Legolas watched them for a while with a smile upon his lips, and then he turned to the others. The strongest must seek a way, say you. But I say, let a ploughman plough, but choose an otter for swimming, and for running light over grass and leaf, or over snow, an elf. With that he sprang forth nimbly, and then Frodo noticed, as if for the first time, though he had long known it, that the elf had no boots, but wore only light shoes, as he always did, and his feet made little imprint in the snow. Farewell, he said to Gandalf, I go to find the sun. Then swift as a runner over firm sand he shot away, and quickly overtaking the toiling men, with a wave of his hand he passed them, and sped into the distance, and vanished round the rocky turn. In addition to this, Legolas represents the elves of the once greater Greenwood realm known in the time of the Lord of the Rings as Mirkwood, as Legolas has for centuries been at war with and under the shadow of the spreading menace of Dol Guldur. He represents the Sylvan elves of the former Greenwood the Great, and when we first meet him at the Council of Elrond, it is due to him bringing them the sad tidings that Gollum had escaped their guard and was once again at large. It is very unlikely he ever would have predicted what quest was to come from this journey. This, though, is largely absent from the films, that Aragorn had also then hunted down Gollum prior to his entry into the story on behalf of Gandalf. We are working on a video dedicated solely to the Council of Elrond, yet here we wanted to mark the importance of Legolas's representation there as the Prince of the Woodland Realm, son of Thranduil, the Elven King, or of course, King of Mirkwood. The character of Legolas in the films is somewhat switched off from Gimli's film character, as Legolas is more of an emotional jokester. He wears his heart on his sleeve, as we said. Gimli is far from the comic relief that he is shown to be in the later films, especially in The Two Towers and The Return of the King, though you could say his portrayal is somewhat closer in The Fellowship of the Ring. We are not now saying one is better than the other, they are simply different representations for different mediums. The same can then be said of Legolas. His ethereal stoicism is in great contrast to Gimli, and it makes their friendship one of contrasting personalities. This is what really makes their eventual brotherhood all the more remarkable.
Shall I describe it to you? Or would you like me to find you a box?
Being an elf affords Legolas certain abilities that are not available to the other characters. Given the other elves present at the Council of Elrond, there were other options for an elven appointment in the Fellowship, not least of all Glorfindel, or the Sons of Elrond, Elladan and Elrohir, or even Gildor, not to exhaust the list of potential candidates. But of them, few had experienced what Legolas had growing up in the darkness of Mirkwood, fighting against the growing strength of Sauron, and growing strength of Dol Guldur too. Not only that, he was a skilled tracker, archer, and had experience dealing with the great spiders of Mirkwood, those of the offspring of Shelob, and therefore, I guess you could say, the grand spiders of Ungoliant herself. His skill set lent itself perfectly to the other members of the Fellowship. This was an inspired choice on behalf of Elrond, as putting Legolas in the company of the Ring allowed for the mending of relationships between the elves and the dwarves as well, an enmity which we have addressed in recent videos which dated back thousands of years, allowing for Legolas to bring Gimli, alone among his people, to the uttermost west in the end. Neither of them would ever marry or have children, and as such their progeny would be the lasting friendship they paved the way for by their example as brothers in arms. Not only that, but he was also a personal confidant of Aragorn. Aragorn's childhood was spent at Imladris, and at times he likely had more in common with the elves more than so the mannish kingdoms of Middle-earth and its inhabitants, such as the likes of Boromir or Theoden. His enhanced hearing and vision would help them along their way on numerous occasions, as he was brave and open to meeting and befriending new people. He was perhaps chosen for his fortitude of heart and character more so than any of his particular qualities as a warrior. This brings us to the mysterious letter, then, that Galadriel sent to Legolas by way of Gandalf when returning to the Three Hunters by way of Lothlorien after he had fought the Balrog. To Legolas she sent this word: Legolas Greenleaf, long under tree in joy thou hast lived. Beware of the sea. If thou hearest the cry of the gull on the shore, thy heart shall then rest in the forest no more. Perhaps this is Galadriel's warning to him that if he remains in one place for too long, he could end up experiencing the type of longing for the sea that happens to other characters, or a hint that the joy he has experienced, despite the constant fighting against the dark forces of Mirkwood, was soon to come to an end, and that an important choice was before him, one that would see him follow his comrades all the way to the Battle of the Pelennor Fields and to the very black gates of Mordor too. Along the way, he is able to allow for the Fellowship to pass when they might not otherwise be allowed, such as with their approach to Lorien when the guards recognise him as kin and help the Fellowship escape from the Orcs' pursuit. "Yes, they are elves," said Legolas, "and they say that you breathe so loud that they could shoot you in the dark." Sam hastily put his hand over his mouth. "But they say also that you need have no fear. They have been aware of us for a long while. They heard my voice across the Nimrodal, and knew that I was one of their northern kindreds, and therefore they did not hinder our crossing, and afterwards they heard my song. Now they bid me climb up with Frodo, for they seem to have had some tidings of him and of our journey. The others they ask to wait a little, and to keep watch at the foot of the tree, until they have decided what is to be done." It is a combination of his skill set, his mentality, and his personality that make him an underappreciated and much needed member of the Fellowship, and one of the persons most responsible for its ultimate success. He sees it through to the very end and continues on enacting good in the world beyond the war when the horns of battle have fallen silent. The singing, laughing Legolas is a different character than we have in the films, but he is just as interesting and dynamic a character. Some of the flashiest moments in the film are given over to him since he has few moments to personally shine, and for that, I guess it means that we can forgive some of the silliness of the abilities that he is able to display. However, that is not to say every single one. So there we have it. Legolas Greenleaf was an integral part of the Fellowship of the Ring. Though he could have been replaced by other elves, few among them, if any, could have provided his precise knowledge or skill to aid the company of the Ring to the extent Legolas himself was able. What makes him even more remarkable is his work following the war. He not only participates in battle, but in the reordering of a much better, more prosperous world that the free peoples of Middle-earth are happier and safer to inhabit, in no large part thanks to Legolas Greenleaf, Prince of the Woodland Realm and the most underrated member of the Fellowship of the Ring. For the running battle of who took more orcs at Helm's Deep, he might have finished on 42, with Gimli besting him with 43. But for one, Legolas did not care as it meant his friend was still alive and safe. And also, 42 is reflective of a fierce and loyal warrior, and that is the least that can be said of Legolas Greenleaf.
43. He was already dead. He was twitching. That is no Orkhorn.
Where was Gondor when the Westfold fell? Where are Theoden's men? Where were the elves when Mordor's forces summoned Grond to smash down the Great Gate of Minas Tirith? We look at this today. Remember everyone, if you find this video helpful, informative, or entertaining today, please remember to hit that subscribe button below. By subscribing, you'll never miss out on any of our latest videos, and you'll be supporting us to continue creating great content like this. Okay, so imagine now, you've only seen the movie versions of Tolkien's epic tale. After all, I have no doubt there are many of you here today, right now, for which that is the case. In the movies, the elves come to Helm's Deep in the Two Towers, right? So you might end up scratching your head and thinking, well, why didn't they show up at Minas Tirith too? But here's the thing, sometimes movies change the story a bit. It's like when you retell a story yourself and maybe add your own little twist to it. That's exactly what happened here with Peter Jackson and his team. The elves never arrived at Helm's Deep, and of course never in Gondor too. So for our answer today, we will of course be looking at the books and focusing ourselves there.
We do not have the strength to fight both Mordor and Isengard.
Before the diversion to draw Sauron's attention to Aragorn and away from the notion that other plans may be in motion, the truth is rather more complex. The elves at the beginning of the story of The Lord of the Rings are somewhat of a waning people. Many are ready to leave Middle-earth altogether and go into the west. However, what is left out of the book are the numerous and epic battles fought by those elves that do remain against the forces of Sauron. They might not be as great as they once were, but they are not finished yet. So, to understand what they were doing and how much or little they may have helped, we need to look at a couple of different battles, the 3 battles of Lorien, the War for Mirkwood, and figure out just what was going on. So let's not forget, during the War of the Ring, battles were happening everywhere. For example, while Frodo and Sam were taking the pass of Cirith Ungol, elsewhere a huge battle was unfolding in Dale. Yes, the same Dale that we know of from the Hobbit tale. There, the great dwarf king Dain sadly met his end. A lot of these things we don't hear in the main story, but the great appendices at the end of the book really fill us in. The fires of war touched many lands, and unlike the film's ending, the peaceful Shire was not spared either. It became a dirty, smog-filled place controlled by rough characters and the once powerful, disgraced wizard of Saruman who now went by the name of Sharky. The movie didn't show how the hobbits later stood up and reclaimed their home, raising an army in the Battle of Bywater. I mean, we have discussed why the filmmakers skipped this part in another video, so if you're curious, please go and check that out on the channel, but it just emphasizes that the horrors of war were not avoided, no matter your race, even if you were a hobbit, let alone an elf. When Frodo escapes the clutches of a maddened Boromir during the break of the Fellowship, he goes on to see the following while upon the seat of seeing at Amon Hen, while he is wearing the One Ring. But everywhere he looked, he saw the signs of war. The misty mountains were crawling like anthills, orcs were issuing out of 1,000 holes. Under the boughs of Mirkwood, there was a deadly strife of elves and men and foul beasts. The land of the Beornings was aflame, a cloud was over Moria, smoke rose on the borders of Lorien. This hints at the first of the 3 conflicts involving the Galadrim of Lorien and the orcs that came to attack them. There were 3 distinct battles fought in the March of 3019 of the Third Age on the 11th, 15th, and 22nd. What we are slowly introduced to is a world at war, which, intentionally or not, reflected the consciousness of the period in which the work was written. While Professor Tolkien was not intending allegory, and was quite famous in his opposition to it, he did distinguish between allegory, which is a sort of trick on the reader, and applicability, which has more to do with the universal themes which unfold throughout the story, as all the great myths and legends have. They are both timely and timeless. The elves were successful in their defense and came out victorious. Although Galadriel is seen as one of the most powerful, it was Celeborn, her husband, who would afterwards lead their people across the Anduin to rid Dol Guldur of the influence of Sauron forever after. It is also interesting to note as a side point here, after this was all done, the War of the Ring was over, Thranduil, the Elven King of Mirkwood, gave the southern area of Mirkwood to Celeborn, where it would then become known as East Lorien. But anyway, Professor Tolkien explained that the success of the Lorien Elves wasn't just about their fighting skills, as impressive as they were. Instead, it was largely due to the mystical force radiating from their land, reminiscent of the protective girdle of Melian from the First Age. This magic once shielded the kingdom of Doriath, considered to be the greatest of the realms of the Sindar, where the Maya Melian ruled alongside the elf King Thingol, until it fell to the power of Morgoth. Back to the Third Age. Roughly at the time of the First Battle of Lorien was the invasion of Rohan. By this time, Isengard had been defeated, and the orcs there wished to stop any forces which may or may not provide any form of aid to Gondor. They wanted to divide the realms of men. When reading the story, it is sometimes hard to realize how much the events of the War of the Ring in fact overlap one another, but that is a skill of Sauron in a way. The power of Sauron was not just that of his own fell sorcery, but the way in which he is able to bound up the world in that same misery too. In fact, we do have a great video on how Sauron makes war, so if you're kind of more interested in diving into that, please go and check out that video as well.
The board is set. The pieces are moving.
So, just as the Battle of Dale begins, we know that the Witch King is able to break the gates of Minas Tirith and enter the city. At that same time, Aragorn has unfurled his standard and has rode into the battle that comes to define the war for men on the Western Front, the largest single conflict of the war that is depicted. Of course, this is the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. While we must remember that, though the films are of course masterpieces, so much stuff is trimmed, recontextualized, or scrapped altogether. As mentioned earlier, the elves do not join the Battle of the Hornburg, yet the arrival of the elves at Helm's Deep is a poignant moment in the film and calls to mind the spirit of the last alliance. The War of the Ring was never a single engagement or even a single series of engagements. It was not a war between the Fellowship and all of their friends. It was a war of Middle-earth, and when the fires of war did burn, many a beautiful thing turned to ash, and there were flames about the woods of Lothlorien, and the battles did hasten the speedy departure of the elves who already waned in the world. It is not that they did not want to help, or they didn't help at all. They did, but their numbers were just not great enough in this day and age to fight on multiple fronts, even with someone as mighty as Galadriel in their ranks. But with having a look at those in Lothlorien, what about elsewhere too? We briefly mentioned King Thranduil and his action from when the war was over, but what about during? Well, the Elves of Mirkwood were attacked just like those of Lothlorien, with the majority of those attackers coming from Dol Guldur. We do not get much information on this apart from knowing that Thranduil and his forces managed to repel these attackers.
His eye is fixed on Rivendell.
So now what about those in Rivendell? Did Elrond just sit back with his feet up while his kin all fought for their lives? Well, Elrond himself took on a very important advisor-type role, more than wielding a sword during the war. He helped form the Fellowship, and even sent his own sons to assist Aragorn in his quest. At the end of the day, Elrond needed to protect his home in case an attack came, and they did not have the numbers to do much more than this. We must also remember, Elrond had the Ring of Power, Vilya, but this probably wouldn't have helped in terms of battle if you were maybe thinking that. It didn't improve Elrond's fighting prowess, but instead helped preserve his realm. After all, we must remember too, the Elven Rings of Power were created and forged with the idea of extending their time in Middle-earth with the thought of peace, not one to win wars. And then finally, if you were perhaps too wondering about Círdan and the Grey Havens, their story is similar again. They are there to maintain and look after what they have, as their numbers cannot stretch further than their own realm here. And in fact, after talking about elves for pretty much this whole video, I feel a nice way to finish here is to look at a quote that comes from none other than the man Faramir. May seem a bit strange, but I feel like it works well with the way many of the race of elves likely thought. War must be, while we defend our lives against a destroyer who would devour all. But I do not love the bright sword for its sharpness, nor the arrow for its swiftness, nor the warrior for his glory. So there we have it. The question of the elves' involvement in the War of the Ring invites us to delve deeper into Tolkien's intricate tapestry of Middle-earth, where every thread tells its own story, and often in the shadows of the larger narrative. From the battle in Lothlorien to the defense of Mirkwood, the elves were anything but idle bystanders. Their valiant efforts across various fronts, though not always highlighted as prominently as the siege of Minas Tirith, were crucial in keeping Sauron's forces at bay. The portrayal of elves in the movies offers only a slice of their broader significance in the literary world Tolkien crafted. Their role during the war was not of grand armies sweeping across fields, but of brave hearts defending their homelands, and in some cases, preparing for the impending departure from Middle-earth. As the Age of Men dawned, the elves, with all their majesty and melancholy, showcased their resilience and commitment to the world they had loved and lived in for so long. They might not have been present at every battleground, but their essence, their legacy, and their sacrifices are woven into the very fabric of Middle-earth's history.
And along with that, if you would like to support the channel in other ways, please consider our Patreon. It would really help us out in that up and down world of YouTube. But with that, thank you for spending just some of your time with me today, and I will see you next time on The Broken Sword.